My name is Riley, and I am 29 years old. At my older brother's lavish engagement party, surrounded by America's elite, my mother pointed at me and sneered that I made a living cleaning floors. My father chuckled, adding that every family has a failure. They thought stripping me of my dignity would keep me in my place. But when my brother shoved a $4,500 wine bill into my chest, he forced me to raise my hand, exposing a crescent-shaped burn scar on my left palm. The groom's billionaire father suddenly stopped smiling, recognizing that scar from a fire 3 years ago. What my toxic family did not know was that the woman they called a garbage sweeper was about to dismantle their entire lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your true worth. The crystal chandeliers of the Oakmont Country Club cast a blinding light over the ballroom, but I had never felt colder. I stood near the edge of the dance floor wearing a simple black dress that clearly did not belong among the sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos. I was only here because my parents had demanded a display of perfect family unity for my brother Connor's engagement to the daughter of an African-American tech billionaire. I held a glass of sparkling water, trying to remain invisible, when my mother Barbara spotted me. She marched over her diamond necklace, catching the light, trailing 3 wealthy socialites behind her. I braced myself for the usual passive aggression, but tonight she was feeling particularly cruel. "These are the wives of the board members at your father's firm," my mother announced, her voice intentionally loud enough to carry over the jazz quartet. "Ladies, this is my other daughter Riley. Do not ask her about the stock market. She makes a living cleaning floors." The socialites exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them forced a tight smile and looked me up and down like I was a stain on the pristine marble. I gripped my glass tighter, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I run a specialized reclamation agency, Mother," I corrected her calmly. "We handle asset recovery." My father Thomas materialized beside her, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. He let out a condescending chuckle that echoed loudly in the quiet space they had created around me. "Let us not put lipstick on a pig, Riley. You clean up messes. Every family has got one failure, I suppose. We cannot all be like Connor." The casual brutality of his words was meant to cut me down to size, to ensure I remembered my place at the bottom of their hierarchy. For years, they had worshipped Connor, treating his every mediocre move as an act of genius. Now that he was 32 and marrying into the Pierce family, an ultra-wealthy tech dynasty, my parents acted as if they had officially secured their spot in American royalty. They never missed a chance to elevate him by stepping directly on my neck. Before I could walk away, Connor pushed through the crowd. He was sweating despite the air conditioning, his eyes wide and manic, completely drunk on his own ego and whatever else he had consumed in the VIP lounge. He held a half-full glass of vintage red wine in his right hand. "Look who decided to crawl out of the basement," Connor slurred, flashing his perfect expensive teeth. "I told Mom not to invite the janitor. You are ruining the aesthetic of my party." "I am leaving, Connor," I said, turning my back to him. As I took a step, he intentionally lunged forward, slamming his shoulder directly into mine. The impact knocked the breath out of me. His wine glass tipped, sending a cascade of dark red liquid splashing violently across his own custom white tuxedo shirt. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Connor screamed, his voice shattering the elegant ambiance of the ballroom. The jazz band faltered. Dozens of heads turned in our direction. "Look what you did to my suit, you clumsy floor scrubber." "I did not touch you," I replied, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You bumped into me on purpose." "Do not you dare call my son a liar," my mother hissed, grabbing my arm with bruising force. "Look at this mess. You ruin everything you touch. You are an absolute embarrassment to this family." Connor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather-bound receipt book from the country club bar. He ripped out the top sheet and aggressively shoved the paper directly into my chest. "That was a vintage bottle we ordered for the VIP table," he snarled, his face inches from mine. $4,500. Since you ruined my night, you are paying for it. It might take you a year of scrubbing toilets to pay it off, but consider it a lesson in learning your place." My father stepped closer, blocking my path to the exit. Do not make a scene, Riley. Just give him your credit card and get out of here before you humiliate us further in front of Mr. Pierce. The absolute audacity of their demand paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. They were completely serious. They were trying to publicly extort me to preserve their golden boy's fragile ego. I felt the heat of 100 staring eyes on my skin. I refused to let them see me cry. I refused to be their victim. I lifted my hand to snatch the ridiculous bill out of Connor's grip. As my arm raised, the sleeve of my dress slipped back, and the harsh chandelier light illuminated my left hand. A deep, angry crescent-shaped burn scar stretched viciously across my palm. It was a permanent physical reminder of a choice I made 3 years ago, a night I ran into a blazing inferno to pull a burning server drive from the wreckage of a billionaire's estate. I had never told my family how I got the scar. They never cared enough to ask. But someone else in the room knew exactly what that mark meant. Donovan Pierce, the imposing African-American tech billionaire and father of Connor's bride, had been standing just a few feet away, quietly observing the entire altercation. He had watched my family berate me. He had watched Connor spill the wine. But the moment his sharp, intelligent eyes locked onto the crescent-shaped scar on my palm, his polite indifference vanished. The color seemed to drain from Donovan's face. He stepped forward, parting the crowd of wealthy onlookers with a commanding physical presence that demanded absolute silence. The murmurs died down. My parents instantly straightened up their arrogant sneers, dissolving into sycophantic, nervous smiles as the billionaire approached our circle. Mr. Pierce. My father began, his voice dripping with sudden, sickening politeness. I am so sorry for this disruption. My daughter was just leaving. Donovan did not even look at my father. He ignored my mother's nervous apologies and stepped directly past Connor's wine-stained tuxedo. His intense gaze remained entirely focused on my scarred left hand. The silence in the ballroom stretched out heavy and suffocating. Could I speak with you outside for a moment? Donovan said, his deep voice directed solely at me. My mother gasped, clearly horrified that the billionaire was addressing the family failure. Oh, Mr. Pierce, please do not waste your time with her. She cleans floors for a living. Donovan finally turned his head, fixing my mother with a stare so cold it could freeze the ocean. I suggest you stop talking, Barbara, he commanded, before turning back to me and gesturing toward the terrace doors. Please, we have a lot to discuss. The heavy glass doors of the Oakmont Country Club slid shut instantly, muting the jazz band and the obnoxious chatter of the elite crowd inside. The crisp night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the ballroom. Donovan Pierce walked to the edge of the terrace and turned to face me. The polite, measured expression he wore inside was entirely gone. In its place was the razor-sharp focus of a self-made titan who missed absolutely nothing. He did not offer a polite opening. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen twice. He held the device out to me. The screen brightness illuminated the dark balcony. I stared at the image, my breath catching in my throat. It was a high-resolution security still from 3 years ago. The picture showed a figure completely engulfed in a heavy fire-resistant hazmat suit. The figure was sprinting out of a crumbling, smoke-filled room, clutching a massive, charred server drive against their chest. The heat of the blaze had melted the left protective glove, tearing the thick material away to expose the bare hand underneath. Searing into the flesh was a fresh, deep, crescent-shaped burn. The exact same mark I bore on my palm today. You are the CEO of Apex Reclamation, aren't you? Donovan stated. It was not a question. It was a declaration of absolute fact. You are the woman who saved my network. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. 3 years ago, Pierce Corporation suffered a catastrophic data center fire caused by an industrial sabotage attempt. The local fire department refused to enter the sublevel because of the toxic chemical suppressants and the risk of structural collapse. They declared it a total loss. My team at Apex took the contract when no one else would. I personally went into that basement because I knew exactly how to extract the core drives without corrupting the magnetic platters. I nearly lost my hand doing it, but I secured the data. We operated under absolute discretion. Pierce Corporation paid my firm $8 million through a blind corporate trust, and my identity remained completely anonymous. Until this exact second, I looked up from the glowing screen and met his unyielding gaze. I require non-disclosure agreements for a reason, Mr. Pierce. How did you get this photograph? When a phantom crew saves my life's work, I make it my business to know who is wearing the suits, Donovan replied, lowering his phone. I knew the name of your company. I knew the legend of the woman running it. I just did not have a face to attach to the file until your brother practically forced you to show me that scar. I straightened my posture, instantly shifting from the humiliated daughter into the executive I truly was. If you brought me out here to thank me for my past services, the gesture is appreciated but unnecessary. My firm was compensated generously. Donovan did not smile. He reached toward a patio table hidden in the shadows and picked up a thick, heavy manila folder. He held it out toward me. I did not bring you out here to thank you, Riley. I brought you out here to warn you. I took the folder, the weight of it dense in my hands. The cover bore the Pierce Corporation legal crest. I opened the flap. The ambient light from the ballroom windows spilled over pages of dense financial spreadsheets, wire transfer logs, and bank routing numbers. My eyes scanned the top document. It was a transaction record from a Cayman Islands offshore account routing directly into a domestic corporate account. The domestic account was registered under the name Apex Remediation, LLC. I frowned, my eyes darting across the text. This is a shell company. The name is off by one word. This has nothing to do with me. Look at the registered agent, Donovan commanded, his voice deadly quiet. I flipped to the second page. A copy of a state business incorporation form stared back at me. Under the listed registered agent and primary beneficiary, I saw my own name, Riley Vance. Beside it was a copy of my actual social security number and a digital rendering of my signature. It was a flawless forgery. I flipped to the third page. Another document authorized a secondary signatory to access the funds a proxy permitted to move millions of dollars through this fraudulent entity without flagging federal regulators. The proxy signature belonged to Connor. Your brother is not just a golden boy, Riley Donovan said, stepping closer. He is running a massive financial scam against my family. And worse, he is using your name to launder the money. A cold wave of dread washed over me, instantly replaced by a blinding surge of fury. I stared at the forged signatures, the intricate web of fake invoices, and the staggering amounts of money listed on the ledgers. Connor was billing Pierce Corporation millions of dollars for phantom consulting services. He was then routing those stolen funds through this fake Apex shell company, effectively washing the dirty money using my stolen identity. If the federal government ever audited this trail, I would be the one facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. My brother was building his fortune by quietly digging my grave. Why are you showing me this? I asked, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level despite the rage boiling in my veins. You have the evidence. You have more than enough to have Connor arrested tonight. You could end this engagement and send him to prison before they even serve the main course. Why give me the dossier? Because I know a predator when I see one, Donovan replied, his dark eyes locking onto mine. And Connor is not smart enough to build a financial architecture this complex on his own. He is the face of the operation, but he is getting help. If I simply hand this over to the authorities right now, the money disappears, the co-conspirators scatter, and my daughter Jasmine becomes collateral damage in a media circus. I refuse to let my daughter's name be dragged through the mud by a parasitic family of con artists. I closed the folder, gripping the edge of the stiff paper. My parents, Thomas and Barbara. They spent my entire life calling me a failure. They funded Connor's lavish lifestyle, claiming his tech startup was wildly successful. Now, staring at these stolen millions, I understood exactly where their sudden influx of wealth had originated. My parents were not just protecting their golden boy. They were likely complicit. You want me to dismantle the network? I said, realizing exactly why the billionaire had approached the woman who cleans up disasters. You want me to trace the funds, secure your assets, and find the kill switch to this entire operation before you pull the trigger. Donovan gave a single firm nod. I know your reputation, Riley. I know you specialize in walking into active infernos and walking out with the asset. Right now, my daughter is standing in a burning building and she does not even know it. Your brother thinks he has outsmarted me. Your parents think they have secured their golden ticket. I want you to tear their operation down to the studs, and I want you to make sure they never see it coming. I looked through the glass doors. Inside the ballroom, my mother was sipping champagne, laughing with her wealthy friends, absolutely certain she had put her worthless daughter in her place. My father was patting Connor on the back, the two of them celebrating a victory they thought was already won. They had spent my entire existence stepping on me to elevate themselves. Now they had foolishly handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. I looked back at Donovan Pierce. The fear and humiliation I had felt just moments ago vanished, completely replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. Consider them handled, I said. I will burn their empire to the ground. I turned the brass handle of the terrace door and stepped back into the suffocating heat of the ballroom. The jazz music had resumed a frantic, upbeat tempo that clashed violently with the adrenaline surging through my veins. I clutched the heavy manila folder tight against my side, hiding the Pierce Corporation crest against the black fabric of my dress. I needed to get to my car. I needed to access my secure servers and initiate the trace Donovan Pierce had just authorized. I kept my eyes fixed on the grand mahogany exit doors, navigating quickly through the sea of oblivious socialites. I was less than 10 feet from freedom when a sharp, manicured hand clamped around my bicep like a steel vise. Before I could pull away, a heavy grip closed over my other shoulder. It was my father. His fingers dug painfully into my collarbone. "Move and keep your mouth shut," he hissed directly into my ear. My mother flanked my left side, her nails digging through the thin fabric of my dress. They did not give me a chance to protest or cause a scene. With terrifying coordination, they shoved me off the main corridor and violently thrust me through a heavy oak door. The sounds of the party vanished instantly as the door clicked shut behind us. We were in a secluded VIP coat room surrounded by racks of expensive furs and tailored overcoats. The air smelled of mothballs and heavy perfume. My father shoved me hard. My back slammed against the paneled wall, knocking the wind out of my lungs. The Pierce dossier slipped from my grip, falling silently into the deep shadows behind a row of winter coats. "What is wrong with you?" I gasped, trying to push myself off the wall. My father slammed his hands flat against the wood on either side of my head, caging me in. His face was flushed with absolute rage, the mask of the sophisticated patriarch completely gone. "What did Mr. Pierce say to you?" my mother demanded, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating from her. "What lies did you tell him out there? We saw you talking. We saw you trying to ruin Connor's night. I told him absolutely nothing about your precious son." I fired back, my voice steady, despite the rapid pounding of my heart. "I was leaving just like you wanted." "You are not going anywhere," my father snarled. He reached into his tailored breast pocket and yanked out a folded piece of thick legal paper. He snapped it open and shoved it against my chest, pinning it there with his forearm. He grabbed my right hand, prying my fingers open with brutal force, and shoved a heavy fountain pen into my palm. "Sign it," he commanded. "Right now." I glanced down at the document. Even in the dim light of the coat room, the bold capitalized letters at the top were unmistakable. Comprehensive medical and financial proxy. It was a conservatorship petition. They were attempting to strip me of my legal autonomy to grant themselves total control over my medical decisions and whatever meager bank accounts they assumed I possessed. It was a gag order disguised as a legal safeguard. "Are you insane?" I shouted, dropping the pen. It clattered uselessly onto the marble floor. "I am not signing anything. You are unstable, Riley." My mother hissed, her eyes wild with a terrifying, frantic energy. "You have been erratic for years. Showing up tonight, harassing the groom, causing a scene in front of billionaires. You need help. You need supervision. We are doing this for your own good." For my own good, I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that bounced off the confined walls. "You do not care about my good. You care about control. You care about making sure I never speak up about what this family really is. Sign the paper, Riley, my father pressed, leaning his entire body weight against me to hold me in place. Do not make this harder than it has to be. I shoved him back with both hands, channeling every ounce of rage I had suppressed for decades. I broke his hold and stepped sideways, putting a rack of heavy coats between us. Do not touch me, I warned, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. You have stolen enough from me. I signed away my rights when I was 18, did I not? When you forced me to hand over the passwords to my college savings account. My mother's jaw tightened. We needed that money for family expenses. You needed that money to buy Connor a Porsche for his graduation, I snapped back, firing the truth like a bullet. I worked 3 jobs in high school. I earned scholarships. I built that fund so I could escape this toxic house. And you drained every single cent of it to buy a sports car for a son who had already failed out of 2 universities. You did not want supervision then, you just wanted a bank to rob. Before my parents could formulate a lie to cover their past theft, the heavy oak door swung open. The hallway light spilled in framing Connor. He had taken off his wine-stained jacket, but the red blotch on his dress shirt looked like a gaping wound. He stepped inside and locked the door behind him, sealing the 4 of us in the suffocating space. He looked at the pen on the floor, the legal document in my father's hand, and then at me. His arrogant smirk returned, uglier and more desperate than before. She is not going to sign it, Dad, Connor said, crossing his arms. You cannot use logic on a floor cleaner. They only understand consequences. Connor pulled his phone from his pocket, tapping the screen with his thumb. What are you doing? I asked, squaring my shoulders. Just looking at the contact list for the local police precinct, Connor replied smoothly. You see, Riley, my beautiful bride-to-be, was showing off her antique diamond necklace earlier tonight. An heirloom piece, easily worth $200,000. And suddenly it has gone missing. My mother gasped, catching onto the narrative instantly. Oh, how terrible. Yes, a real tragedy. Connor continued. His eyes locked onto mine. The police will have to search everyone. But they will probably start with the hired help. They will start with the bitter, jealous sister who runs a sketchy cleaning company. I bet if they search your car or your little janitor closet of an office, they will find the necklace. Or maybe they will just find a mountain of stolen jewelry from the country club guests. Who knows what a desperate garbage sweeper might take when she thinks no one is looking? He was blatantly threatening to frame me for grand larceny. If the Pierce dossier Donovan handed me was the slow poison Connor was using to destroy me, this was the immediate guillotine. A felony theft charge against a perceived blue-collar worker at a billionaire's party would stick. He would ensure the police found planted evidence. He would use his new father-in-law's influence to make sure I was denied bail. Signing the medical proxy would make me a ward of the state under their control, but a grand larceny conviction would send me to federal prison. My father picked up the fountain pen from the marble floor and held it out to me again. The gold trim glinted in the dim light. You have 2 choices, Riley, my father said, his voice dropping all pretense of paternal care. You sign the proxy, go home, and quietly admit yourself to the psychiatric facility we have selected. We will handle your bills. Or Connor makes the call. You spend the night in a holding cell, and tomorrow morning the press releases a story about the groom's deranged, thieving sister. The security footage will show you splashing wine on your brother. The narrative is already written. Connor took a step toward me, holding his phone up so I could see the screen. The numbers 911 were already dialed in. His thumb hovered over the green call button. 10 seconds, sis. Connor taunted, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. 10 seconds to decide if you want to be a crazy person in a nice soft hospital bed, or a convicted felon sleeping on concrete. Do not test me. I will ruin your life without blinking. The coat room felt incredibly small, the air thick with the scent of wool and malice. I stared at the phone in Connor's hand, the numbers 911 glowing brightly on the screen. They expected me to fold. They expected the years of psychological conditioning to kick in, forcing me to surrender to their demands to avoid public embarrassment. My father held out the gold fountain pen, a triumphant sneer already forming on his face. Instead of taking the pen, I reached forward and snatched the comprehensive medical and financial proxy right out of his grip. Before my father could react, I gripped the thick parchment with both hands and ripped it straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the quiet room. I stacked the two halves and tore them again, letting the shredded pieces flutter to the marble floor like worthless confetti. My mother gasped, stumbling backward into a rack of fur coats. "You stupid girl!" she shrieked. Connor dropped his phone, his confident smirk vanishing instantly. "What are you doing? I will call them right now. I swear I will do it." "Make the call, Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Call the police. Tell them about the antique necklace. And when they arrive, I will tell them to review the high-definition security cameras in the VIP lounge. The ones that run on a closed-circuit system your hacker cannot reach. The cameras that clearly show you deliberately spilling your own wine. The cameras that show I never came within 2 feet of your fiancée or her jewelry. Let us see how Mr. Pierce reacts when the police drag his future son-in-law out in handcuffs for filing a false police report." Connor froze. His bluff was completely dismantled. I stepped forward, driving my shoulder hard into my father's chest. He grunted in surprise, stumbling out of my way. I shoved past Connor, kicking the shredded pieces of the proxy contract aside. "Do not ever try to cage me again," I said without looking back. I grabbed the brass handle of the heavy oak door, yanked it open, and marched out of the coat room. The jarring sound of the jazz band and the chaotic chatter of the ballroom hit me instantly, but I did not slow down. I kept my posture rigid, my chin high, walking through the sea of elite guests with the calculated confidence of a predator. I ignored my mother shouting my name from the coat room doorway. I ignored the confused stares of the socialites. I just needed to get out of that building. The heavy glass front doors slid open and the cool night air washed over me. The valet rushed forward, but I waved him off, bypassing the line of luxury sedans and heading straight for the overflow parking lot where I had left my car. It was a matte black armored SUV, heavily modified for secure transport and mobile command. I was 10 yards away from my vehicle when the absolute silence of the parking lot was shattered. My phone, secured deep inside my clutch, erupted. It was not a standard ringtone. It was a piercing dual-tone siren that vibrated against my ribs. A level 1 red alert. I ripped the phone out of my bag. The screen was flashing a violent strobing red, a catastrophic breach protocol originating directly from the Apex Reclamation Headquarters mainframe. I unlocked the SUV, threw myself into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. I immediately plugged my phone into the secure dashboard console. The 12-inch touchscreen flared to life, syncing with the Apex mainframe. Lines of code cascaded down the display at blinding speed. Warning: the automated voice of my security system announced through the car speakers. "Unauthorized access detected. Biometric firewall under direct assault." I pulled up the security matrix. Someone was actively hammering the primary gateway to the Apex corporate accounts. These were the accounts holding millions of dollars in liquid assets, client escrows, and operational funds. To get this far, they had already bypassed the standard encryption layers. Now they were attacking the final impenetrable wall, the biometric lock. I watched the dashboard screen in absolute horror as the attack vector rendered visually. The unauthorized user was not trying to crack the code. They were trying to spoof me. The screen displayed a wireframe model of a face rotating slowly. It was a deep, faked, three-dimensional mesh of my own face. It was flawlessly detailed, capturing the exact micro-expressions and structural dimensions required to fool a retinal scanner. And right beneath it, a digital fingerprint match was running. The hacker was injecting a stolen high-resolution scan of my fingerprints directly into the verification protocol. "How did they get this?" I muttered aloud, my fingers flying across the steering wheel console to initiate countermeasures. Then it clicked. The engagement party. The excessive photographs being taken by the hired media crew. The way my mother had insisted on holding my hands earlier in the evening, supposedly to admire my manicure, pressing my fingers firmly against her smooth glass-like phone case. The way Connor had lunged at me, creating a chaotic distraction. It was a coordinated physical extraction of my biometric data. Lock down all external ports, I commanded the system. Initiate manual override sequence. Alpha 7. Initiating the system replied. Firewall integrity at 40%. They were burning through the security layers fast. I needed to know who was running the exploit. While my countermeasures fought to freeze the accounts, I opened a tracing application on the secondary screen. I bypassed the standard protocols and launched an aggressive reverse ping designed to strip away the hacker's proxy layers. Trace the origin IP I ordered. The map on the dashboard screen exploded into a web of glowing lines, bouncing from servers in Eastern Europe to South America, desperately trying to mask the true location. But the Apex tracing software was built to hunt down cyber criminals who tried to hide stolen corporate data. It chewed through the proxies relentlessly. Got you, I whispered. The glowing lines on the map converged, snapping back to the United States. They zoomed in on the East Coast, plunging rapidly into the state, the city, and finally the exact neighborhood. A bright red reticle slammed down onto a specific building. The location coordinates resolved into plain text on the screen. Oakmont Country Club, Subnetwork 3, Guest Wi-Fi. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the blinking red dot, the realization hitting me with the force of a freight train. The ping was originating from a device sitting less than 300 yards away from me. My family had not dragged me into that coat room just to extort me for a broken wine glass or force me into a medical conservatorship. That entire confrontation was a meticulously orchestrated distraction. They needed me away from my phone. They needed me panicked, cornered, and entirely focused on their physical threats so I would not notice the silent alarm triggering in my pocket. While my father was pinning me against a wall and Connor was threatening to call the police, their hired hacker was sitting comfortably inside the country club sipping top-shelf champagne, using my stolen fingerprints to actively drain the Apex corporate accounts. They were trying to steal my entire empire while I was physically standing right in front of them. I slammed the SUV into gear. The heavy tires spun against the asphalt, kicking up gravel as I tore out of the Oakmont Country Club parking lot. On the dashboard screen, the firewall integrity dropped to 18%. The hacker was relentless, burning through the secondary encryption layers using the deep-faked biometric mesh. I merged onto the interstate, pushing the twin-turbo engine to its absolute limit. The city lights blurred into streaks of yellow and white. I did not bother calling the authorities. Cyber units would take hours to secure a warrant and my accounts would be drained in minutes. I had to kill the connection at the root. I exited the highway and shot down the financial district corridor, braking hard in front of a towering monolith of tinted glass and black steel. This was the real Apex Reclamation headquarters. It was not a janitorial supply closet. It was a cutting-edge fortress built to handle international disaster recovery and sensitive data retrieval. I bypassed the visitor lanes and sped directly toward the reinforced steel barricades of the underground garage. The automated sensors scanned my license plate, and the heavy gates swung open. I slammed the brakes in my reserved spot, grabbed my phone, and sprinted toward the private executive elevator. Two armed security contractors flanked the polished chrome doors. They recognized me instantly and stepped aside. I pressed my thumb to the biometric scanner on the wall. The elevator shot upward, bypassing the administrative floors and stopping dead on the 42nd sub-level command center. The doors slid open to reveal a massive, dimly lit room filled with server racks and monitoring stations. I ignored the night shift technicians and vaulted over a desk to reach the primary terminal. The dashboard sync had kept the session active. Firewall integrity was at 9%. I slammed my hand onto the physical manual override console. I typed in the 12-digit alphanumeric kill code and twisted the physical key embedded in the desk. A blaring alarm echoed through the server room. The screens flashed a brilliant blinding white before instantly snapping to a solid impenetrable black. System locked. Total asset freeze initiated. Every bank account, every offshore routing number, and every corporate ledger associated with Apex Reclamation was instantly severed from the global network. No money could go in, and absolutely no money could go out. The hacker sitting back at the country club was now staring at a dead connection. Connor and my parents had failed. I exhaled a shaky breath, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from my muscles. The Pierce family assets were safe. My empire was secure. But I knew my parents would not stop. They would pivot to their backup plan. The morning sun cast a harsh, unforgiving light over the crumbling brick facades of the city's industrial district. I stood inside a cramped, suffocatingly hot storefront. The windows were caked in years of grime, partially obscured by rusty iron bars. The air inside smelled of cheap industrial bleach, rotting wood, and damp cardboard. A dozen broken mop buckets were stacked haphazardly in the corner next to a rusted metal desk. This was the decoy office. I had rented this dilapidated garbage dump 5 years ago under a dummy corporation. I knew my parents were obsessed with appearances and social hierarchy. If they ever tried to track down my business, I needed them to find exactly what they expected to find: a miserable, failing cleaning service run by their loser daughter. The crunch of heavy tires on broken glass broke the morning silence. I peered through the dirty window. A sleek silver Mercedes sedan rolled to a stop along the cracked curb. Directly behind it, a black and white city police cruiser parked at a sharp angle, its lights flashing silently. The doors of the Mercedes opened. My mother stepped out onto the garbage-strewn sidewalk wearing a pristine white designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses. My father emerged from the driver's side, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. Two uniformed police officers stepped out of the cruiser, looking bored and annoyed to be there. I unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the heavy glass door open. The rusted hinges shrieked loudly. My mother's face lit up with a grotesque, predatory joy the moment she saw me. She marched right up to the concrete steps, waving a thick stack of legal documents stapled to a bright blue cardboard backing. "It is over, Riley," Barbara practically sang, her voice trembling with malicious excitement. "We have a court-ordered eviction and asset seizure. You ignored the medical proxy last night, so we fast-tracked the debt collection. You owe $50,000 in fabricated credit loans, and we are legally seizing this pathetic excuse for a business to cover the costs." One of the police officers stepped forward, resting his hand casually on his utility belt. "Ma'am, we are here to enforce a civil seizure. We need you to vacate the premises and hand over all keys and operational assets related to this address." My father sneered, looking past me into the dark, foul-smelling room. "You should have signed the paper last night, Riley. Now you have absolutely nothing. We own your business. We own your equipment. You are ruined." I did not argue. I did not scream. I looked at the broken mop buckets, the stained walls, and the rotting floorboards. I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out a heavy iron ring holding 3 rusted bent keys. I looked my mother dead in the eyes, maintaining a completely defeated, blank expression. I tossed the keyring through the air. The heavy metal hit the concrete right at the tip of Barbara's expensive designer shoes. "It is all yours," I said softly. I stepped off the curb, walking past the police officers and my gloating parents. Behind me, I could hear my mother laughing, a sharp, triumphant sound as she stepped into the filthy, abandoned room, absolutely thrilled to have conquered a pile of garbage while the real empire remained untouchable. I did not look back as the rusted hinges of the decoy office groaned shut, trapping my mother inside her own delusion of grandeur. The 2 police cruisers pulled away from the cracked curb, their tires crunching over the broken glass and gravel of the industrial district. The officers had done their job, executing a fraudulent civil seizure on a worthless property, completely unaware they were pawns in a pathetic family charade. My father was already walking toward his silver Mercedes, too busy dialing his phone to notice my departure. I kept my pace steady, heading toward the end of the block where I planned to call for secure transport back to the real Apex headquarters. Before I reached the corner intersection, the deep guttural purr of a high-performance engine echoed down the empty street. A sleek black SUV with heavily tinted windows and reinforced steel plating rounded the corner and glided to a halt just inches from the curb, deliberately blocking my path. It was not one of my corporate vehicles. I braced myself, my muscles tensing as I analyzed the tactical angles of the narrow sidewalk and prepared for a physical confrontation. The rear passenger door swung open. A pair of pristine crimson-soled stilettos stepped onto the cracked pavement, followed by a sharply tailored charcoal gray designer suit. Jasmine Pierce emerged into the harsh morning light. At 28, Donovan's daughter was strikingly beautiful, a statuesque African-American woman who commanded the space around her effortlessly. Last night at the country club, she had played the role of the oblivious, starry-eyed bride to perfection, hanging onto Connor's arm, laughing at his shallow jokes and projecting the exact image of a pampered socialite. That innocent bride persona was entirely gone. She reached up, pulled off her oversized designer sunglasses, and locked eyes with me. There was no warmth in her gaze, only the sharp, calculating intellect of an apex predator sizing up a potential ally. Connor does not know I am a forensic financial crimes prosecutor, Jasmine revealed, her tone bearing the exact same absolute authority as her billionaire father. The statement hit me like a physical strike. I stared at her, rapidly recalibrating everything I knew about the Pierce family and this lavish, highly publicized sham of an engagement. My father and I set up this entire engagement to trap his syndicate. Jasmine continued, stepping away from the open door and closing the distance between us. Connor thinks he is playing the naive heiress. He thinks he is marrying into a fortune he can quietly siphon off through his phantom consulting firms and offshore shell companies. He has no idea he walked willingly into a massive federal sting operation. We needed him comfortable, we needed him arrogant and sloppy, and we needed to map every single node of his financial architecture before we dropped the hammer. I absorbed the magnitude of the trap. The Pierces were not victims waiting to be bled dry. They were the ruthless architects of Connor's ultimate destruction. But if you have him dead to rights, why pull me into the open, I asked, refusing to lower my guard. Why did your father tip his hand to me last night on the terrace? Because there is a problem, Jasmine said, her jaw tightening. She turned back to the SUV, reached into the back seat, and pulled out a slim silver laptop. She slapped the machine down onto the hood of the car, the metal casing clattering against the reinforced exterior. She flipped the screen open, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision to bypass a series of encrypted federal login screens. We spent 6 months tracing Connor's money laundering network, Jasmine explained, keeping her eyes locked on the glowing display. We mapped the shell companies, we tracked the wire transfers. We identified the dummy corporations, including the fake Apex entity he registered under your stolen identity. We were preparing to unseal the indictments and freeze his assets on Monday morning. But last night, my digital forensics team hit a legal firewall we did not anticipate. She spun the laptop around so the high-resolution screen faced me directly. "Look at this," she ordered. I stepped closer to the hood of the SUV and leaned in. Displayed on the screen was a scanned copy of a legal document filed in a remote, highly secretive county in Nevada. I scanned the bold, bureaucratic text. It was a certificate of marriage. The filing date was stamped nearly 2 years ago. I looked at the signatures at the bottom of the page. The primary signatory was Connor. I traced my finger to the second signature, my breath catching in my throat. The name jumping off the screen belonged to Brittany, my estranged, highly manipulative cousin. "Connor is already legally married," Jasmine stated, her voice tight with professional frustration. "Brittany," I whispered, staring at the digital ink on the screen. We had not spoken to Brittany in almost a decade. She was notorious for running high-end grifts, bouncing between wealthy marks, and vanishing before the legal consequences ever caught up with her. She had the exact same moral bankruptcy as my brother, paired with a dangerous, calculating intelligence that Connor completely lacked. They eloped in secret to shield his assets, Jasmine explained, tapping the corner of the laptop screen. Spousal privilege and marital asset protection laws. Any stolen funds Connor funnels into Brittany's offshore accounts become legally tangled in a bureaucratic nightmare. They are using their legal union as a financial black hole. If my task force arrests Connor right now, the federal government cannot touch the secondary accounts Brittany controls without navigating a labyrinth of marital exemption statutes. By the time we secure the warrants to pierce her accounts, she will have wired the millions out of international jurisdiction and vanished into the wind. I gripped the edge of the car hood, the entire picture snapping into crystal clear focus. My brother was not acting alone. He never had the intellect to build a financial scam this robust or to execute a biometric hack against a corporate server. He was the charming face, the sociopathic frontman. Brittany was the silent architect operating in the shadows. She was the one managing the offshore routing. She was the one who forged my signature and stole my social security number to create the fake Apex remediation shell company. Connor was the bait, but Brittany held the keys to the vault. My father wanted to handle Connor using private corporate security, Jasmine said, closing the laptop with a sharp, decisive snap. But I do not just want Connor. I want the money back, and I want the entire syndicate burned to ash. Brittany is the weak link, but she is paranoid. She operates entirely off the grid. We cannot find her physical location, and we cannot freeze her secondary accounts without triggering her early warning alarm systems. Jasmine picked up the laptop, tucked it under her arm, and looked me dead in the eye. The cold, relentless determination in her gaze mirrored my own perfectly. We know you specialize in extracting unrecoverable assets, Jasmine said, stepping away from the car. We know you understand the twisted psychology of your own family better than any federal agent ever could. You know how Brittany thinks, and you know how to bypass her security. She paused, letting the morning traffic rumble past us before delivering the final, devastating question. Are you ready to help me send your brother to federal prison? I stood on the cracked sidewalk, the stench of the industrial district fading completely into the background. Hours ago, I had been on the defensive, reacting to my family's relentless attempts to cage and destroy me. Now the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The Pierce family was handing me the full weight of a federal prosecution. They were offering me the ultimate weapon to sever the toxic chains my parents, my brother, and my cousin had wrapped around my neck. I looked at Jasmine Pierce, matching her fierce, uncompromising intensity with a cold smile of my own. Open the passenger door, I said. Let us go hunt my cousin. I pulled the passenger door open and climbed into the plush leather interior of Jasmine Pierce's SUV. Within 48 hours, our improvised alliance transformed into a highly coordinated sting operation. Jasmine needed hard evidence linking my mother and cousin to the financial web before she could authorize federal warrants. I needed to know exactly how deep their theft ran. The perfect opportunity presented itself in the form of a bridal fitting at Maison de Rêves, the most exclusive bridal boutique in the city. My mother had orchestrated the entire appointment, eager to flaunt her newly acquired, albeit entirely fraudulent wealth to her billionaire future daughter-in-law. Jasmine had smoothly arranged for me to attend under the guise of a hired bridal assistant and errand girl. The boutique was a cavernous space of white marble crystal chandeliers and walls lined with imported silk gowns. I stood near the entrance wearing a drab, oversized gray blazer and sensible flat shoes, holding a heavy garment bag over my shoulder. I kept my gaze lowered, playing the part of the meek, invisible servant. My mother sat on a tufted velvet sofa in the center of the VIP viewing area. Beside her sat Brittany. My cousin looked exactly as I remembered, though her features were sharpened by expensive cosmetic procedures and a ruthless hunger. Brittany was brazenly acting as Jasmine's maid of honor, a strategic position she had undoubtedly wormed her way into to monitor the Pierce family up close. Jasmine emerged from the dressing room wearing a spectacular lace gown. She twirled gracefully, perfectly maintaining her clueless bride persona. "Oh, Jasmine, it is absolutely flawless," my mother cooed, clasping her hands together. "Only the best for my future daughter." Brittany took a sip from her crystal champagne flute. "It needs taking in at the waist," she noted, her tone dripping with unearned authority. "And the hem is entirely too long. Assistant, come fix this." She snapped her fingers at me. I stepped forward, biting the inside of my cheek to keep my expression completely blank. I dropped to my knees on the cold marble floor, pulling a cushion of sewing pins from my pocket. As I began pinning the delicate lace hem around Jasmine's ankles, Brittany intentionally shifted her weight, knocking her foot against my hand. The sharp end of a pin bit deep into my thumb. A drop of blood welled up instantly. "Watch what you are doing, you clumsy idiot," Brittany sneered, staring down at me with absolute contempt. "Do not bleed on the merchandise. It costs more than you will make in a lifetime." I wiped the drop of blood on the fabric of my gray blazer and resumed pinning. Jasmine shifted her weight, creating a subtle barrier between my cousin and my hands. She shot me a brief, razor-sharp glance of solidarity before turning her beaming, innocent smile back to my mother. "I am just so grateful you are handling the boutique invoices," Barbara Jasmine said brightly. "My father insisted on paying, but Connor told me you wanted to take care of the dress and the floral arrangements personally." My mother puffed out her chest, turning toward the boutique owner, who was hovering nearby with a tablet. "It is my absolute pleasure," my mother announced, projecting her voice so every employee in the room could hear. "I just withdrew $500,000 from our family business account to cover the remaining wedding vendors. We believe in sparing no expense for family." My hands froze. The pin hovered millimeters from the lace fabric. $500,000 from the family business account. I had initiated a total asset freeze on the Apex corporate accounts yesterday morning. Connor's fraudulent shell company was locked down. The offshore accounts were severed. There was absolutely no way my mother had withdrawn $500,000 in cash from the network we had just paralyzed. I finished pinning the hem and stood up, stepping back into the shadows. Jasmine excused herself to change out of the gown, gesturing for me to follow and assist her. My mother and Brittany immediately stood up and crowded into the massive mirror-lined dressing room right behind us, completely disregarding any boundaries. Jasmine stepped behind a velvet privacy screen to change. I stood near the vanity, pretending to organize a tray of pearl hair clips. Brittany leaned against the doorframe, inspecting her manicure, while my mother admired her own reflection in the trifold mirror. "You are quiet today, Riley." Brittany noted, her voice dropping into a vicious, mocking register. "Did your little janitorial business finally go bankrupt? I heard the police threw you out onto the street yesterday morning." My mother laughed, a sharp grating sound that bounced off the mirrors. "She has always been a disappointment, Brittany. It was only a matter of time before she lost everything. At least Connor knows how to build real wealth." I kept my eyes on the tray of hair clips, my mind racing at breakneck speed. Real wealth. $500,000 in liquid cash. How did she get it? If the Apex accounts were frozen, they had to have generated a new influx of capital within the last 24 hours. My eyes darted to Brittany's reflection in the mirror. She was holding her designer clutch. Protruding slightly from the zipper was the edge of a thick blue banking folder. It bore the logo of a notorious high-interest commercial lender, the kind of shadow bank that issued massive uncollateralized loans to high-risk corporate entities without asking too many questions. I stared at the logo, piecing the puzzle together with horrifying clarity. Connor and Brittany could not access the frozen Apex funds, but they still had the flawless digital forgery of my signature. They still had the deep-faked biometric mesh of my face. And they still had my stolen social security number. My mother had not withdrawn money from a family account. She had taken out a massive black market commercial loan. They had leveraged my stolen identity to secure $500,000 in dirty cash from a shadow lender. They were not just laundering money anymore. They were actively committing high-level tax fraud and corporate identity theft, pinning a $500,000 illicit debt directly to my personal social security number. If the federal government audited that shadow loan, the IRS and the FBI would not go after my mother. They would come straight for me. I looked up, meeting Brittany's gaze in the mirror. She smiled, a cold, reptilian curving of her lips. She knew exactly what I was realizing. She wanted me to know she had trapped me in a financial burning building. Jasmine stepped out from behind the velvet screen, dressed in her sleek street clothes. She looked at me, instantly reading the subtle shift in my posture. "Are we finished here?" Jasmine asked, her voice carrying a dual meaning only I understood. "Yes," I replied, turning away from the mirror and walking toward the door. "We have everything we need." I smiled coldly, stepping completely out of the fitting room suite and leaving the suffocating perfume and inflated egos behind. The satisfying weight of my phone in my pocket felt like a loaded weapon. The deep-faked biometric mesh they had stolen was entirely useless against the localized security protocols I kept isolated on my personal device. I stepped into a quiet alcove near a display of imported silk veils and pulled out my phone. It took exactly 4 seconds to bypass my own encryption walls and access the catastrophic breach interface. I isolated the shadow loan Brittany had illegally anchored to my social security number. I did not simply freeze the stolen $500,000. I weaponized it. I initiated a direct, unencrypted handshake with the FBI's Financial Crimes Automated Reporting System. I fed the fraudulent loan origination data, the forged signatures, and the exact routing numbers of my mother's newly inflated bank accounts directly into the federal database. I flagged my own SSN as actively compromised and linked the unauthorized credit draw straight back to Barbara. I hit the execution command. The screen flashed a brilliant validating green. The federal tripwire was set primed and completely inescapable. I slipped the phone back into my gray blazer just as my mother and Brittany strutted out of the VIP suite. They moved with the synchronized, obnoxious arrogance of women who believed they were utterly untouchable. My mother led the charge toward the main checkout counter, a massive slab of polished white marble flanked by towering crystal vases. The boutique owner, a severe-looking woman in a tailored black dress, waited by the register with a deferential, eager smile. Jasmine trailed slightly behind the two women, catching my eye for a fraction of a second. The look we exchanged across the showroom floor was pure, lethal anticipation. "We are ready to finalize the deposit for the custom alterations and the imported Italian lace," my mother announced. Her voice carried across the quiet boutique deliberately loud enough for the other wealthy patrons browsing the racks to hear. "I believe the total for today is $40,000. A mere fraction of the overall budget, of course." The boutique owner tapped the screen of her sleek point-of-sale terminal. "Yes, madam. 40,000 exactly. Will you be using the corporate account you mentioned earlier?" "Naturally," my mother replied. She snapped open her designer clutch and produced a heavy, solid metal platinum credit card. She placed it onto the marble counter with a sharp, satisfying clack. It was the physical manifestation of the stolen $500,000. The boutique owner picked up the card, slid it into the chip reader, and waited. I stood silently near the display mannequins, watching the digital display on the terminal facing the customer. The screen processed the encryption, communicating with the banking servers. Then the ambient silence of the boutique was pierced by a sharp, aggressive electronic buzz. The machine blared a bright, unforgiving red. The word "declined" flashed in bold block letters. The boutique owner frowned, a flicker of professional embarrassment crossing her carefully composed features. "I apologize, ma'am. It seems the transaction was not approved. Perhaps the daily spending limit was triggered by the large amount." My mother snatched the platinum card back, her face flushing with instant hot indignation. "That is impossible. There is $500,000 of liquid cash in that account. Your machine is broken. Run it again." The owner took the card, wiped the chip on her sleeve with a placating nod, and inserted it a second time. The machine processed for 3 seconds before buzzing again. The red screen illuminated my mother's furious face. "Declined." The smug superiority melted off my mother's face, replaced by a jagged edge of genuine panic. She dug frantically into her clutch, pulling out a handful of alternative cards. "Use this one," she commanded, tossing a black elite card onto the marble. The owner ran it. The machine buzzed. "Declined." "This one, then." My mother snapped, her voice rising in pitch as she tossed a gold card across the counter. "Declined." "Try the joint account card," she demanded, throwing a silver card onto the counter. Her hands were visibly shaking now. The machine shrieked its denial a fifth time. All declined. Every single financial lifeline she possessed had been completely severed by the federal hold I had just triggered. Brittany stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she glared at the terminal. "What did you do?" she hissed, looking wildly around the room, her paranoia finally catching up with her. She locked eyes with me, standing quietly in the corner. Before Brittany could connect the dots and realize I had orchestrated their sudden financial ruin, the heavy glass front doors of Maison de Rêves swung open with explosive force. The delicate chime above the entrance was entirely drowned out by the heavy synchronized footsteps of two men in dark suits and tactical windbreakers. They did not look like boutique patrons. They moved with the rigid, unmistakable authority of federal law enforcement. They marched straight down the center aisle, bypassing the racks of expensive silk gowns, their eyes locked directly onto my mother. The entire boutique fell dead silent. The soft classical music playing over the speakers suddenly felt absurdly out of place. The lead detective, a tall man with a silver badge clipped prominently to his belt, stopped 5 feet from the marble counter. "Barbara Vance," he announced. His voice was a booming baritone that echoed off the crystal chandeliers, ensuring every single person in the store heard him perfectly. "We are detectives with the Economic Fraud Division. We have a federal warrant to seize your assets, pending a full investigation for aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny." My mother stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the polished floor. She gripped the edge of the marble counter to keep from collapsing entirely. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow, aged, and terrified. "There has been a mistake," she stammered, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I am a wealthy woman. I am paying for a wedding. You have the wrong person." The second detective pulled a thick stack of folded documents from his jacket, bearing the official, undeniable seal of the federal court. "There is no mistake," he replied coldly. "You are currently holding credit instruments tied to a fraudulent commercial loan secured under a stolen Social Security number. Your accounts have been frozen by federal mandate. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the pristine bridal boutique was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The economic fraud detectives did not care about Barbara's designer dress or her sputtering outrage. They read her Miranda rights, spun her around, and marched her right out the heavy glass doors. Shoppers gasped, clutching their pearls as my mother was shoved into the back of an unmarked federal sedan. In the chaos, Brittany vanished like a ghost, slipping out the back exit before the detectives could verify her identity. Jasmine offered me a subtle nod before resuming her role, loudly demanding to know how her future mother-in-law could be a common criminal. I left the boutique through a side door and climbed back into Jasmine's waiting SUV. I knew the victory would be short-lived. Thomas Vance did not become a corporate titan by surrendering. He had an army of high-priced defense attorneys on retainer. By midnight, the rapid-fire text messages from Jasmine confirmed my suspicions. The lawyers had successfully posted Barbara's exorbitant bail. The federal agents had her passport, but she was back on the street. Instead of retreating to lick their wounds, my parents and Connor shifted instantly into aggressive scorched earth damage control. The following morning, my phone began to vibrate relentlessly against my nightstand. It was not the authorities. It was a torrential flood of messages from distant cousins, great aunts, and family friends I had not spoken to in a decade. I unlocked my screen and opened my primary social media feed. The top post was a highly polished, carefully worded public statement published simultaneously across my father's, my mother's, and Connor's accounts. The bold heading read, "A request for privacy during a family health crisis." I read the paragraphs that followed, my jaw clenching so tightly my teeth ached. They had launched a massive coordinated gaslighting campaign designed to completely obliterate my credibility before the federal indictments became public knowledge. The statement claimed with sickening manufactured sympathy that I had suffered a severe psychotic break. They painted the incident at the bridal boutique not as a federal arrest for fraud, but as a violently delusional episode triggered by my declining mental health. They claimed my mother was merely detained to de-escalate my violent outburst. Connor added his own sickening commentary in the replies. He wrote that my actions were driven by sheer spinster jealousy, claiming I was a bitter, lonely woman obsessed with destroying his perfect wedding because I could not secure a husband of my own. He detailed entirely fabricated stories of me screaming at the walls, hoarding garbage, and exhibiting dangerous paranoia. My mother sent a mass email to the entire extended family and their elite social circle begging for prayers, while actively warning people to ignore any wild accusations I might make. She claimed my mind was gone, poisoned by isolation and jealousy. It was a masterful, utterly ruthless character assassination. They were preemptively discrediting any evidence I might provide to Jasmine or the FBI by branding me a lunatic. To the outside world, I was no longer a victim of corporate identity theft. I was a tragic, unstable spinster, actively trying to sabotage her golden brother's happiness. The text messages on my phone were filled with fake pity. Aunts telling me to get help. Uncles offering to pray for my soul. But the social media circus was merely a smokescreen for the real attack. At noon, a process server knocked heavily on the reinforced door of my actual apartment. I checked the security feed, verified his credentials, and accepted the thick manila envelope he handed me. I dropped the heavy packet onto my kitchen island and tore it open. The legal header on the first page made my blood run cold. It was an expedited petition filed in the state Supreme Court. My father Thomas was not just trying to silence me in the court of public opinion. He had officially filed a petition for a full medical conservatorship. I flipped through the pages, analyzing the staggering level of corruption my father had mobilized in less than 24 hours. He had attached 3 separate psychiatric evaluations. Every single one of them was an absolute forgery, signed by highly paid doctors, who sat comfortably on the board of my father's country club. The fraudulent documents painted a terrifying picture. They diagnosed me with severe schizophrenia, claiming I was entirely detached from reality, prone to sudden violence, and completely incapable of managing my own affairs. They cited the fake cleaning business as proof of my financial ruin and mental decline. They even claimed I had threatened to harm Connor's fictional bride. The objective was clear and utterly terrifying. Thomas intended to have a judge declare me legally incompetent. If the petition succeeded, I would instantly lose my fundamental human rights. My father would be granted permanent unchecked control over my life, my medical decisions, and my finances. He would gain legal access to every bank account, every offshore routing number, and every corporate ledger attached to my name. He would uncover the real Apex reclamation empire and absorb it into his own syndicate, draining everything I had built over the last decade. Worse, the petition explicitly requested immediate institutionalization. Thomas intended to force me into a high-security private psychiatric facility under the guise of parental care. He wanted to lock me in a padded cell, dose me with heavy sedatives, and throw away the key while he and Connor stripped my life bare. It was the ultimate permanent silencer. I stared at the forged signatures on the psychiatric evaluations. The sheer audacity of their cruelty was breathtaking. They truly believed they could weaponize the legal system to erase me from existence. They thought I would panic, react erratically to the summons, and inadvertently prove their fraudulent claims of instability. They assumed I was still the defenseless daughter they could bully into submission. I picked up my phone and dialed Jasmine's secure line. She answered on the first ring. They just filed for a medical conservatorship. I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. They submitted fabricated psychiatric evaluations to the court. Thomas wants to lock me in a ward and seize my assets. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Jasmine instantly understood the severity of the threat. A conservatorship grants them total immunity, she said, her tone dropping into her prosecutor register. If he gets legal control over you, he can dismiss any fraud charges you try to file against Barbara. He can silence you legally and medically. He is going to try, I replied, staring down at the legal documents. But he just made a fatal miscalculation. By submitting forged medical documents to a state judge, he just committed felony perjury. I need your federal task force to move on those doctors right now. We are going to turn his trap into a guillotine. I ended the call with Jasmine and shoved the phone back into my pocket. The trap for the corrupt psychiatrists was set, but I had no time to celebrate. I needed to secure the physical servers at my actual headquarters before my father attempted to execute his fraudulent conservatorship. I navigated my SUV through the labyrinth of the financial district and descended the steep concrete ramp into the secure underground parking garage of the Apex Reclamation Building. The heavy steel barricades rolled shut behind me, sealing off the outside world. I pulled into my reserved spot, cut the engine, and stepped out into the damp, echoing silence of the subterranean structure. Nice setup for a janitorial supply closet. The voice echoed off the concrete pillars slick with arrogant amusement. I pivoted sharply. Connor stepped out from the shadows of a massive structural support column, clapping his hands in a slow, mocking rhythm. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit completely out of place in the grim industrial lighting of the garage. He had bypassed the decoy office. Somehow, through Brittany's digital footprint tracking or sheer dumb luck, he had traced my route straight to the real fortress. He looked around, taking in the reinforced steel doors, the high-end security cameras, and the fleet of armored transport vehicles parked in the adjacent bays. "I have to admit, Riley, you played us perfectly," Connor said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mom and Dad thought you were scrubbing toilets to make rent. Instead, you are running a multi-million-dollar corporate empire right under our noses." I kept my posture rigid, calculating the distance between us. "How did you get in here, Connor?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Brittany has friends in very low places. A cloned access badge goes a long way." He closed the distance between us, pulling a thick manila folder from his jacket. He slapped it down onto the hood of my SUV, the sharp smack echoing in the empty garage. "You have been holding out on the family, little sister. But I am a generous guy. I am willing to forgive your deception and offer you a partnership." He slid a heavily redacted legal contract out of the folder. "Sign over 50% of Apex Reclamation to me right now. I become co-CEO with full executive access to your operational accounts and total control over your client ledgers." I stared at the paper, then up at his smug face. "Are you insane? I would rather burn this building to the ground than give you a single dime." Connor's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory sneer. "I figured you would say that." He pulled a tablet from his briefcase and tapped the screen. He held it up for me to see. High-definition video played, showing a team of cleaners in Apex uniforms scrubbing a gruesome blood-soaked warehouse. The faces of the workers were obscured, but the company logos on their hazmat suits were glaringly obvious. "Deep fakes are a wonderful tool," Connor whispered maliciously. Brittany generated terabytes of fabricated footage proving that Apex Reclamation specializes in cleaning up hazardous crime scenes for the Eastern Seaboard Mafia. "If you do not sign that transfer right now, I release this entire data packet directly to the FBI and the local media. The feds will seize your assets, dismantle your company, and lock you away for racketeering. Your reputation will be obliterated overnight." I stared at the screen, letting my eyes go wide. I forced my breathing to accelerate, taking short, shallow gasps. I stumbled backward against the side of my SUV, clutching my chest. "You cannot do this," I stammered, my voice trembling perfectly. "Connor, please. The feds are already looking into Mom. If they see this, they will take everything I have built." I let my knees buckle slightly, sliding down the side of the door until I was crouched on the concrete floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a steady stream of tears to spill down my cheeks. I hyperventilated, playing the broken, terrified, completely defeated sister to absolute perfection. "Please stop. I cannot lose my company. It is all I have." Connor laughed, a loud, triumphant sound that bounced off the concrete walls. He nudged the contract closer to the edge of the hood. "Then sign the paper, Riley. It is just business. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I sobbed loudly, wrapping my arms around my stomach. "I do not have a pen," I choked out between ragged gasps. "Use your own," he ordered, pointing to my tote bag resting on the passenger seat. With shaking hands, I reached into my leather bag. I bypassed the standard ballpoint pens and wrapped my fingers around a sleek black fountain pen I used specifically for drafting sensitive temporary blueprints. The ink inside was chemically engineered to vanish completely when exposed to any temperature over 80 degrees. I pulled myself up, my shoulders heaving, and leaned over the hood of the SUV. I uncapped the thermal vanishing pen. My tears splashed onto the glossy hood of the car as I hastily scribbled my signature on the bottom line of the asset transfer agreement. I pushed the paper back toward him, burying my face in my hands. Connor snatched the contract, examining the fresh ink with greedy satisfaction. "See? That was not so hard," he gloated, slipping the document back into his folder. Welcome to the partnership, little sister. I expect a full operational briefing by tomorrow morning. Do not be late. He turned on his heel and strode back toward the exit ramp, whistling a cheerful, upbeat tune. His footsteps faded into the distance until the heavy steel door slammed shut, sealing the garage once again. I stood up slowly. I wiped the remaining tears from my face and smoothed the lapels of my blazer. My breathing instantly returned to a slow, controlled rhythm. The panic attack vanished without a single trace. I looked down at the thermal pen in my hand, smiling coldly as I capped it and dropped it back into my bag. By the time Connor took that contract out of his warm car or left it in a heated office, the page would be completely blank. I turned toward a seemingly empty dark gray utility van parked 3 spaces away in the shadowed corner of the garage. I raised 2 fingers in a silent signal. The side panel of the van slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. Inside, a wall of glowing monitors illuminated the faces of 3 heavily armed tactical operatives. It was Donovan Pierce's private security detail. The lead operative, wearing a matte black headset, gave me a sharp nod. Audio and video are crystal clear. Miss Vance, the operative, confirmed, tapping his primary console. We captured the entire extortion threat, the blackmail attempt, and his explicit admission regarding the deep-faked evidence. The federal prosecutor has a direct feed. I crossed my arms, feeling the cool air of the underground garage against my skin. Connor had just handed us the final nail for his own coffin. I watched the gray utility van melt into the downtown traffic, carrying the encrypted hard drives that held Connor's confession. Donovan's operatives were ruthlessly efficient. They had not just monitored the parking garage, they had comprehensively bugged Connor's executive suite at my father's firm weeks ago. For the next few days, I sat back in the shadows of my true command center and watched my brother swagger through his existence, blissfully unaware that he was a dead man walking. He bragged to our father about a massive imminent acquisition. He strutted through designer fittings for his bespoke Italian wedding tuxedo. He was riding the euphoric high of his imaginary extortion. Exactly 3 days before he was scheduled to stand at the altar and marry Donovan Pierce's daughter, the bill came due. I sat at my primary terminal sipping black coffee as I watched the live surveillance feed broadcast from the hidden camera in Connor's office. The digital clock on my monitor read exactly 9 in the morning. Today was the absolute final deadline for Connor to deliver his $5 million buy-in to Donovan's elite offshore investment fund. It was the financial cornerstone of the marriage arrangement, a reverse dowry demanded by Donovan to prove my brother's corporate worth and liquidity to the Pierce syndicate. Connor had sworn the funds would be wired by noon. Connor strutted into his office, locking the heavy frosted glass door behind him. He looked incredibly smug, adjusting his silk tie and shooting his cuffs before walking over to a large, abstract painting on the far wall. He swung the heavy frame aside to reveal a flush biometric wall safe. I tapped my keyboard, zooming the camera feed in tight. He punched in his 6-digit code, pressed his thumb flat to the scanner, and pulled the heavy steel door open. He reached inside and retrieved the manila folder containing the extortion contract I had signed. He intended to use it as his golden ticket, planning to present my forged signature to Donovan as ironclad proof of his impending wealth and corporate leverage. He tossed the folder onto his leather desk pad and flipped it open. Even through the silent, slightly grainy security footage, I could see the exact second his heart simply stopped beating. The smug, untouchable aura evaporated instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He picked up the contract, bringing it inches from his face. He flipped it over his hands, beginning to shake violently. He rubbed the surface of the paper, scratching at it, as if the ink had simply fallen asleep and needed to be aggressively awakened. It was a completely blank, crisp white sheet. The thermal ink had reacted perfectly to the ambient heat of his enclosed safe, vanishing without a single trace. He had absolutely nothing. Connor tore his pristine office apart. He ripped open mahogany drawers, threw confidential files across the room, and emptied his briefcase onto the expensive Persian rug, desperately convinced he had simply grabbed the wrong document. He tore through the safe again, tossing out velvet watch boxes and corporate ledgers. When the reality finally set in, he collapsed heavily into his ergonomic chair, gripping his hair with both hands. He grabbed his phone and frantically loaded his banking applications. The screen cast a pale, sickly glow on his terrified face. He was completely, unequivocally broke. Barbara's accounts were heavily frozen by the federal mandate I had triggered. His own trust fund had been leveraged to the absolute hilt to quietly pay for Brittany's shadow lifestyle. He had zero leverage, and Donovan Pierce was not a man who accepted apologies for missed multi-million-dollar deadlines. Connor was a cornered rat, and rats do not surrender peacefully. They chew through the floorboards. I watched him launch into a desperate, sweating frenzy of self-preservation. He booted up his secure desktop and furiously bypassed the standard firm firewall. He was logging directly into a highly restricted financial portal. It was the joint escrow account, established specifically for the wedding, holding the massive $5 million Pierce family investment capital. Donovan had granted Connor limited administrative access simply to facilitate the transfer of assets after the marriage certificate was signed. Connor was not going to wait for the wedding. He initiated a catastrophic, irreversible wire protocol. My brother was actively embezzling $5 million directly from a man who casually employed armed tactical teams. His fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard, setting up a labyrinth of digital shell companies and untraceable offshore routing numbers. He was trying to wash the stolen money through 3 different international clearinghouses to obscure the origin of the theft. He clicked the final authorization, draining the Pierce accounts in a matter of seconds. Immediately after hitting execute, he snatched his encrypted burner phone from his jacket pocket. I switched my audio interface to intercept the cellular signal, piping the conversation directly into my headset. Brittany answered on the first ring, her voice laced with sleep and confusion. "Pack your bags right now," Connor hissed, his voice cracking with panicked adrenaline. "Leave the jewelry, leave the expensive clothes. Just grab your passport and get to the private airstrip. We are leaving immediately." "What about the wedding?" Brittany asked her, panic matching his. "What about your family?" "There is no wedding!" Connor shouted frantically, shoving a stack of emergency bearer bonds and loose cash from his safe into a canvas duffel bag. "The contract is gone. The ink disappeared. Riley set me up. If I stay here, Donovan will kill me, and Thomas will gladly stand back and let him do it. I just pulled $5 million from the Pierce escrow accounts. We are going to the Cayman Islands today. I have a chartered flight waiting under an alias. If we leave right now, we will be untraceable by the time they realize the money is gone." He terminated the call, abruptly zipped his duffel bag shut, and bolted for the door, leaving his executive office in complete ruins. He truly believed he had outsmarted everyone. He thought he was escaping to a tropical paradise with his secret wife and a stolen fortune. He did not realize that Donovan's elite cybersecurity team had flagged the unauthorized wire transfer the very millisecond he initiated it. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands behind my head, as I watched my brother sprint down the hallway on the security feed. The final stage of the collapse had begun, and there was absolutely nowhere for him to hide. As Connor's figure disappeared from the security feed, another alert flashed across my secondary monitor. He was not just running, he was actively rerouting digital breadcrumbs before his dramatic departure. I tapped into his outgoing data packets, watching lines of code confirm his true nature. The sheer cowardice of his exit strategy was magnificent in its cruelty. He was routing the stolen $5 million through shell companies specifically registered under my mother's maiden name and my father's primary tax identification numbers. Connor was deliberately framing Thomas and Barbara for the massive embezzlement. He was leaving behind forged authorization emails, fabricated bank mandates, and doctored IP logs that pointed directly to the computers in my parents' private residence. He was serving his own parents up on a silver platter, leaving them to face the brutal, inevitable wrath of a cheated billionaire syndicate, while he sipped cocktails on a distant, sunny beach. Jasmine walked into the control room, handing me a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. She leaned over my shoulder, her eyes tracing the data streams cascading down the high-definition screen. "He is burning his own house down to stay warm," she observed, her voice laced with a mixture of disgust and dark amusement. I nodded, pulling up a live satellite tracking map. We did not just have access to his outgoing emails and financial records. We had fully compromised his vehicle's onboard navigation system and his heavily encrypted burner phone. A pulsing red dot moved frantically down the interstate highway, heading directly toward the international terminal of the city's primary airport. We left the subterranean headquarters immediately and climbed into Jasmine's heavy armored SUV. The drive to the airport was a masterclass in controlled adrenaline. I kept the tactical tablet balanced on my knees, watching the red dot navigate through heavy afternoon traffic. Connor was moving recklessly, blowing through toll booths and weaving erratically between lanes. He believed he was outrunning Donovan Pierce, completely unaware that we were tracking his every move, calculating his exact trajectory, and predicting his final destination. We pulled up to the chaotic departures curb at the international terminal. I bypassed the standard security lines, flashing a prioritized corporate access badge I kept exclusively for high-level emergencies. Jasmine mirrored my swift pace. We moved through the crowded concourse with lethal, silent purpose blending into the sea of frantic travelers while keeping our eyes locked on the precise GPS coordinates updating on my screen. The terminal was a sprawling glass and steel cathedral echoing with flight announcements and the relentless rumble of rolling luggage. We pushed past overwhelmed families and distracted businessmen tracking the digital signal straight down Concourse E. There he was, Gate 42. The final boarding call for a privately chartered flight to the Cayman Islands was blinking ominously on the overhead digital display. Connor stood near the boarding desk, clutching his heavy canvas duffel bag like a life preserver. Brittany hovered anxiously beside him, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a tan trench coat, looking less like a glamorous runaway bride and more like a terrified fugitive attempting a terrible disguise. Connor kept checking his gold watch, his foot tapping a frantic, irregular rhythm against the patterned airport carpet. He was inches away from the jet bridge, inches away from vanishing forever into a tropical tax haven. I stepped out from behind a massive illuminated advertising pillar and walked directly into his line of sight. Jasmine flanked my right, her posture radiating pure, unmistakable authority. Connor looked up from his watch. Our eyes met across the crowded gate area. I did not say a single word. I just smiled. It was a cold, absolute smile that promised nothing but total, inescapable destruction. The color instantly drained from Connor's face, leaving his complexion looking sickly and hollow. The panicked, desperate groom routine vanished in a fraction of a second. The polished golden boy mask he had worn for his entire 30 years simply cracked and fell away, revealing the raw, unhinged, and pathetic core beneath. He dropped his canvas duffel bag. It hit the polished floor with a heavy metallic thud that turned the heads of nearby passengers. Brittany grabbed his arm, whimpering softly, but he violently shook her off, pushing her backward. He did not run toward the jet bridge. He did not drop to his knees and beg for mercy. Instead, cornered and entirely stripped of every defense mechanism he had ever possessed, Connor threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, maniacal, jagged sound that drew alarmed, uneasy stares from the surrounding passengers waiting to board. The laughter echoed through the cavernous terminal, harsh, bitter, and entirely devoid of sanity. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and slowly pulled out a small metallic silver flash drive. He held it up between his fingers, brandishing the tiny device like a loaded weapon. "You think I am the mastermind, Riley," he sneered, his voice dropping a full octave, raspy with pure, unfiltered venom. "You actually think I am the one pulling the strings in this family?" He took a slow step closer, ignoring the airport security guards who were beginning to glance in our direction. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and frantic. "Dad and Mom orchestrated this entire scam from day one. They set the whole damn thing up." He jabbed a trembling finger toward the silver flash drive. Every forged signature, every shadow account, every fake ledger hidden in the company books. It was entirely their design. They pushed me to marry the Pierce girl, and they explicitly instructed me to initiate that $5 million transfer this morning. I stared at him, letting the staggering magnitude of his confession settle over the chaotic gate. He was not just shifting the blame to save his own skin. He was exposing a level of familial depravity I had not fully anticipated. They set me up to steal from the Pierces so they could quietly claim the massive insurance payout. Connor practically spit the words, his face twisted in bitter, absolute rage. They knew Donovan would notice the missing funds immediately. They deliberately built the digital trail to ensure I took the fall. My own parents. He laughed again, a harsh grating sound that clawed at the air. They were perfectly willing to send their precious favorite golden son to a federal penitentiary for the rest of his life just to secure a massive financial payday. They burned me, Riley. They threw me entirely to the wolves. Connor stood frozen at the departure gate, his chest heaving under his bespoke suit. He gripped the silver flash drive like a lifeline, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He expected me to lunge at him. He braced himself for a physical altercation, a screaming match, or a desperate plea to keep the family secrets buried. I did none of those things. I simply extended my hand, my expression completely void of sympathy. I wrapped my fingers around the cool metal of the drive and smoothly plucked it from his trembling grip. He was too stunned by his own confession, too consumed by the terrified adrenaline coursing through his veins, to even tighten his hold. I slipped the drive securely into my blazer pocket. I took a deliberate, measured step to the right, entirely clearing his path to the boarding desk. I gestured toward the illuminated jet bridge with a perfectly polite, entirely empty smile. "Run, Connor," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Have a wonderful flight." He stared at me for a fraction of a second, his brain failing to process the complete lack of resistance. Then blind survival instinct took over. He grabbed Brittany by the wrist, shoving aggressively past the confused gate agent, and sprinted down the sloping, carpeted tunnel of the jet bridge. Jasmine and I did not follow. We simply stood at the terminal window and watched the final act of his pathetic play. At the end of the tunnel, just inches from the open aircraft door, Connor and Brittany did not find their tropical salvation. They crashed headlong into a solid wall of tactical nylon. 6 undercover FBI agents stepped seamlessly out from the shadows of the boarding ramp. Even through the thick, soundproof glass of the terminal, I could hear Connor's high-pitched, terrified scream. The agents slammed him against the corrugated metal wall of the tunnel with practiced efficiency. The harsh, metallic ratcheting of heavy-duty handcuffs echoed all the way back to the departure lounge. His grand escape to the Cayman Islands ended exactly 30 feet from where it started. I turned away from the window before the agents even began reading him his Miranda rights. Jasmine fell into step beside me as we marched back through the sprawling, crowded airport concourse. We reached her armored SUV parked illegally at the curb, and I handed her the silver flash drive. She plugged it directly into her encrypted field laptop while I navigated the heavy vehicle out of the airport traffic and onto the interstate. The drive to the Fairfield suburbs was silent, save for the rapid, methodical clicking of Jasmine's keyboard. It took her exactly 14 minutes to bypass the rudimentary encryption Connor had hastily slapped onto the files. The data contained within the drive was nothing short of breathtaking. It was a masterclass in parental treachery and corporate fraud. Connor had spoken the absolute truth. The files contained a meticulously organized digital paper trail proving that Thomas and Barbara had engineered the entire embezzlement scheme from the ground up. There were direct, unencrypted emails between my father and offshore insurance adjusters, actively negotiating a massive payout for a theoretical cyber theft. There were digital mandates created by my mother, designed to trigger a cascading series of alerts the moment Connor accessed the Pierce Syndicate escrow accounts. They had deliberately laid the digital breadcrumbs to ensure that when the $5 million vanished, the FBI and Donovan Pierce would follow the trail straight to their golden boy. They had planned to sacrifice their favorite son, sending him to federal prison for decades, simply to secure a massive financial payday for themselves. I engaged the SUV's integrated secure printer, listening to the steady mechanical hum as it spit out page after page of high contrast, undeniable proof. I gathered the thick stacks of warm paper, binding them into two separate heavy dossiers. The sun had completely set by the time I pulled the SUV onto the sprawling manicured grounds of the Fairfield estate. I parked directly on the circular driveway, ignoring the designated visitor spots. The massive colonial house was brightly illuminated against the dark night sky, glowing like a beacon of stolen wealth. I stepped out of the vehicle, gripping the heavy dossiers tightly in my left hand. Through the towering bay windows of the formal dining room, the scene inside was perfectly framed. It was supposed to be the intimate final family dinner before the grand wedding weekend commenced. Thomas and Barbara were seated at opposite ends of the long mahogany table. The room was bathed in the warm golden glow of crystal chandeliers. A silver ice bucket rested on a side table, chilling a bottle of expensive vintage champagne. My father raised his crystal flute, offering a smug, self-satisfied toast to my mother. She laughed, a bright melodic sound, clinking her glass against his across the expanse of polished wood. They looked incredibly relaxed, triumphant, and utterly untouchable. They were actively celebrating their impending millions. They were toasting to a flawless execution of their treasonous plan. They were completely blissfully unaware that their golden son was currently sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle, sobbing uncontrollably while wearing stainless steel bracelets. I did not bother walking up to the decorative doorbell. I marched up the wide brick steps, squared my shoulders, and raised my heavy leather boot. I kicked the solid oak front door with absolute uncompromising force, striking the wood dead center beneath the heavy brass lock. The reinforced deadbolt splintered instantly, tearing through the door frame. The heavy door flew open with a deafening, violent crack that echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. I stepped over the threshold, my boots crunching loudly over the shards of broken wood. I marched straight down the polished marble hallway. My footsteps rang out like gunshots in the sudden, terrified silence of the house. I turned the corner and strode directly into the formal dining room. My parents froze in their high-backed velvet chairs. My father dropped his champagne flute. The delicate crystal shattered against the hardwood floor, sending a spray of expensive vintage wine across the priceless Persian rug. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, her face draining of all color as she stared at me in absolute shock. Before either of them could formulate a single lie, demand an explanation, or scream for security, I reached the edge of the dining table. I raised the thick, heavy stacks of printed treason and brought them down with devastating force. I slammed the financial dossiers directly onto their antique gold-rimmed china plates. The fine porcelain cracked loudly under the impact, splitting down the middle. I stood over them, watching the color leave their faces as their eyes locked onto the top pages. The undeniable proof of their greed, their betrayal, and their imminent destruction was resting right in front of them, served perfectly alongside their ruined dinner. The heavy silence in the formal dining room was absolute, broken only by the steady drip of vintage champagne pooling on the expensive Persian rug. Thomas stared at the printed emails, his eyes darting frantically across the highlighted text. His mind, usually a steel trap of ruthless corporate strategy, completely short-circuited. He looked at the offshore insurance mandates, then at the forged digital trails leading straight to Connor, and finally up at me. Beside him, Barbara's perfectly manicured hands trembled violently. She touched the fractured porcelain of her dinner plate, seemingly unable to comprehend that her impenetrable sanctuary had been violently breached. The thick dossiers laid out their entire criminal conspiracy in stark, undeniable black and white. There was no tearful apology. There was no desperate plea for forgiveness, nor any sudden realization of their monstrous parental failures. Instead, I watched the carefully constructed masks of Boston high society simply melt away. Stripped of their loving parents' facade, Thomas and Barbara revealed the pure, unadulterated malice that had always lurked beneath their tailored suits and designer gowns. The polished, benevolent benefactors vanished, replaced by the cornered, venomous predators they truly were. Thomas slammed his fists onto the mahogany table, shaking the remaining crystal glasses. His face contorted into a mask of pure unleashed hatred. He did not look at me like a daughter. He looked at me like a pest control problem that had ruined his masterpiece. Barbara was the first to find her voice. It was not the melodious, cultured tone she used to charm donors at charity galas. It was a vicious, guttural screech that scraped against the silk wallpaper of the elegant room. She pushed her heavy velvet chair back violently, standing up to glare at me with eyes full of naked malice. "You think this means anything?" She spat, her chest heaving under her bespoke evening gown. "You think waving a few hacked papers around changes who you are? You are nothing, Riley. You will always be a filthy trash cleaner. That is all you have ever been, and that is all you will ever be." I did not flinch. I let her rage wash over me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold clinical detachment. "You can buy all the tactical teams and secure servers in the world," Barbara screamed, stepping around the table, her voice reaching a shrill, hysterical pitch. "You can play CEO in your little underground bunker, but you will never belong in our world. Even with money, you will never have my social standing. You lack the pedigree, you lack the class, and you lack the intellect. You are a biological disappointment who scrubs blood off concrete for a living." Her face was flushed crimson, the veins in her neck visibly bulging. She was unraveling, clinging desperately to her elitist delusions as her reality collapsed around her. She pointed a trembling, accusing finger directly at my face. "You want to play hardball?" she shrieked. "Fine. Connor already showed you what we prepared." Brittany generated terabytes of fabricated evidence tying Apex Reclamation to the Eastern Seaboard Mafia. We built a flawless narrative painting you as a cartel cleanup crew. I am not going down for an insurance scam. I am calling the New York Times right now to expose your company's fake mafia ties." She lunged for her designer clutch resting on the antique sideboard and ripped her smartphone from inside. Her thumbs hammered aggressively against the glass screen, her breathing ragged and shallow. "I have personal friends on the editorial board of the New York Times." Barbara bragged, her voice thick with vindictive, desperate triumph. "Elite media contacts who dine at this very table. I am calling them right now. I am sending them the entire data packet. By tomorrow morning, your fake corporate empire will be headline news. The feds will seize your precious company, and you will rot in a federal cell, while Thomas and I walk away entirely clean." I crossed my arms and watched her. I did not move to stop her. I did not utter a single word of protest. I just waited. Barbara tapped the screen one final time and aggressively hit the speakerphone icon, slamming the device down onto the ruined dining table so Thomas and I could hear her glorious victory unfold. The phone rang loudly, the digital tone echoing through the high ceilings of the room. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Barbara crossed her arms, matching my posture, a cruel, triumphant sneer plastered across her face. She waited for her high society contact, her golden parachute, to answer the line and destroy me. A sharp click signaled the connection. "Barbara," a voice resonated from the small speaker. The sound hit the room like a physical shockwave. It was not the polished, eager tone of a Manhattan journalist. It was a deep, gravelly baritone dripping with quiet, terrifying authority. The voice was entirely unmistakable. It was Donovan Pierce. Barbara froze. The triumphant sneer slid off her face, instantly replaced by stark, paralyzing terror. Thomas gasped, stumbling backward until his spine hit the antique china cabinet. His eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. "Donovan," Barbara whispered, her voice completely devoid of air, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the table. "How are you on this line?" A low, dark chuckle vibrated through the speakerphone. "Barbara, I own that publication," Donovan said smoothly, his tone colder than the winter sea. "I own the editorial board, I own the servers, and I own the digital routing exchanges. The moment your device attempted to transmit that pathetic, fabricated data packet, my security teams intercepted it and rerouted your little distress call directly to my personal line." Silence choked the dining room. Barbara stood absolutely paralyzed, staring at her phone as if it had turned into a live explosive. The realization of her total entrapment was suffocating. She had tried to leverage her social standing against a man who practically owned the society she worshipped. You and Thomas made a grave miscalculation. Donovan continued, his voice dropping into a lethal quiet register. You attempted to steal $5 million from my family. You attempted to frame my future son-in-law, and when that failed, you attempted to frame your own daughter. The Pierces do not tolerate thieves, and we certainly do not tolerate traitors. Thomas finally found his voice, stepping forward with his hands raised in desperate surrender to a piece of plastic. Donovan, please, we can explain. This is a massive misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. Thomas Donovan cut him off sharply. Your son is currently sitting in a federal holding cell. He sang like a canary the moment the cuffs clicked shut. He handed over every password, every offshore account number, and every single detail of your pathetic insurance scam. He gave you up without a second thought. The air in the room grew heavy, stale, and completely suffocating. Barbara let out a small, broken whimper, her knees buckling slightly as she clutched the mahogany table for support. Your elite contacts cannot save you now, Barbara Donovan stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Your social standing is gone. Your wealth is gone. And if you look out your window, you will see exactly what is left of your future. The call abruptly disconnected, leaving a heavy, dead dial tone humming in the silence. Slowly, mechanically, Barbara and Thomas turned their heads toward the towering bay windows facing the circular driveway. Through the sheer silk curtains, the darkness of the suburban night was suddenly fractured by a blinding, strobing explosion of color. Silent, rhythmic flashes of red and blue light painted the walls of the dining room, illuminating the shattered china and the spilled champagne. Heavy tactical vehicles were pouring onto the manicured lawn, crushing the expensive landscaping. The rhythmic, synchronized thud of combat boots echoed from the front porch. Dozens of armed federal agents swarmed the property. The FBI was currently surrounding the house, sealing off every exit, every escape route, and every last vestige of their privileged lives. The federal raid was a spectacle of flashing lights and shattered glass, but it was not the final curtain on my family's staggering delusion. The FBI hauled my parents and brother out of their suburban fortress in handcuffs, parading them past the manicured lawns they so desperately worshipped. However, the sheer blinding arrogance of Thomas and Barbara proved thicker than federal indictments. They spent exactly 24 hours in holding before appearing in front of an arraignment judge. With their corporate accounts frozen and their personal assets seized by Donovan's digital strike, they possessed absolutely zero legitimate capital. Thomas, however, was a cornered animal with a Rolodex full of monsters. He bypassed the traditional banks and went straight to the city's criminal underbelly. He leveraged the absolute last drop of his fabricated reputation, borrowing heavily from brutal, unforgiving loan sharks to post their exorbitant bail. He sold these dangerous men the ultimate, desperate lie, guaranteeing repayment through the impending Pierce family merger. They were entirely delusional, clinging to a sinking ship with bloodied fingernails. The $1 million wedding had been booked, planned, and leveraged months in advance. Instead of canceling the lavish affair and preparing for their inevitable federal trial, Thomas and Barbara doubled down on their insanity. They decided to push forward with the ceremony. Their master plan was a masterpiece of aristocratic desperation. They intended to corner Jasmine at the altar. Jasmine, my brilliant tactical partner who had been riding shotgun in my armored SUV, was Donovan Pierce's daughter. She had played the role of the oblivious heiress flawlessly for months, feeding us every drop of actionable intel. Thomas and Barbara believed that the Pierce syndicate operated strictly on honor, public perception, and high society rules. They were convinced that if they could just force the wedding to proceed in front of hundreds of influential witnesses, Donovan would be publicly trapped. They planned to extort the billionaire for their own bail money, demanding a massive financial lifeline to prevent the pristine Pierce name from being permanently chained to a convicted felon. It was a hostile hostage situation, wrapped in white tulle and designer lace. The venue was a towering, historic cathedral in the heart of the city, an architectural marvel of vaulted stone ceilings and stained glass. It was a $1 million spectacle funded entirely by incredibly dangerous debt. Thousands of imported white roses cascaded down the ancient marble pillars, filling the cavernous space with a heavy, almost suffocating floral perfume. Ushers in tailored tuxedos guided the guests down the crimson-carpeted aisles. Hundreds of America's absolute elite filled the polished oak pews. High-profile politicians rubbed shoulders with tech CEOs and old money socialites whispered behind silk fans. Rumors of the FBI raid were already slithering through the elite crowd like venomous snakes, but the sheer undeniable opulence of the event kept them rooted to their seats. They were vultures waiting eagerly to see if the Golden family would fly or crash into the ground. Barbara stood near the front row wearing a custom couture gown that cost more than my entire first year of college. Her smile was a brittle, terrifying slash across her face. She greeted the billionaires and politicians with a manic, desperate energy, acting as if her bank accounts were not currently sitting at absolute zero. Thomas paced the alcove near the altar, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy wooden doors. He was sweating through his bespoke suit, his hands trembling slightly as he checked his gold watch. The loan sharks had given them exactly 48 hours to deliver the Pierce money. The invisible clock was ticking loudly in his ears, far louder than the murmurs of the elite crowd. No one in that cathedral looked worse than the groom. Connor stood at the grand marble altar looking like a dead man propped up for public display. He had been temporarily bailed out of a concrete federal cell, and the untouchable Golden Boy facade was entirely obliterated. He was sweating profusely, beads of moisture rolling down his pale, clammy forehead and soaking into the starched collar of his expensive tuxedo shirt. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and darting around the massive church like a trapped prey animal. He looked repeatedly at the towering stained glass windows, half expecting federal snipers to crash through them at any moment. He was terrified of the loan sharks who now owned his father, terrified of the impending federal trial, and absolutely petrified of Donovan Pierce. He knew the truth about Jasmine now. He knew she had played him flawlessly, reeling him into the trap while I secured the perimeter. He was nothing but a hollow puppet, ordered by his arrogant parents, to stand at the altar and wait for a bride he had actively tried to embezzle from. He tugged at his silk tie, struggling to draw breath in the suffocating atmosphere of his own making. The tension inside the cathedral reached a suffocating, almost unbearable peak. The low murmur of the hundreds of guests suddenly hushed as the massive pipe organ groaned to life. The deep, vibrating chords swelled through the historic stone architecture, shaking the floorboards beneath the polished pews. It was the traditional wedding march, but it sounded more like a heavy funeral dirge. Connor flinched visibly at the tremendous sound, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists at his sides. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply against his tight collar. Barbara leaned forward in the front pew, her eyes wide with manic expectation, her manicured nails digging deep into the oak wood in front of her. Thomas stopped pacing and stood rigidly at attention, silently praying for his billionaire bailout to arrive. The organ music hit a triumphant, booming crescendo, echoing powerfully off the vaulted ceilings. At the far end of the long crimson aisle, the heavy, intricately carved mahogany doors of the church slowly began to swing open. The heavy mahogany doors of the church slowly swing open. The massive iron hinges groan a deep metallic sound that slices directly through the swelling, triumphant chords of the pipe organ. 500 heads turn in perfect, synchronized anticipation. A collective held breath echoes from the politicians, the old money socialites, and the ruthless corporate titans packing the pews. They are expecting a vision in white lace. They are expecting a submissive billion-dollar bride ready to secure a highly anticipated corporate merger. There is no bride. I step confidently over the threshold and onto the plush crimson carpet. I am not wearing the pathetic pastel chiffon bridesmaid dress my mother had mandated for her invisible, disposable daughter. I am wearing a razor-sharp, bespoke charcoal power suit. The tailored lines are severe, uncompromising, and radiate absolute authority. It is the armor of a woman who commands a multi-million-dollar reclamation empire. My posture is rigid. My gaze is a physical weapon. In my right hand, I hold a sleek wireless microphone, the metallic casing catching the brilliant, blinding light of the overhead crystal chandeliers. A wave of shocked, confused murmurs instantly ripples through the packed wooden pews. The whispers quickly escalate into a chaotic, buzzing hive of disbelief because I am not walking down this aisle alone. Jasmine steps into the cathedral immediately behind me. She is not wearing a wedding gown. She is dressed in a severe, immaculate black blazer and tailored dark trousers. Her expression is stone cold, a flawless mask of absolute contempt as she locks her dark eyes with the sweating, trembling man waiting at the altar. She is the heiress Connor thought he could easily manipulate, now standing proudly as his judge and executioner, flanking Jasmine. Stepping into the holy, multicolored light of the stained glass windows is Donovan Pierce. The billionaire syndicate boss does not look like a proud father giving away his daughter. He looks like a warlord arriving to inspect a conquered territory. His face is chiseled granite. His icy, predatory gaze sweeps across the congregation, instantly freezing the whispers in the throats of the elite attendees. The sheer, terrifying gravity of his presence sucks the oxygen directly out of the massive room. I begin my march down the long center aisle. My heels strike the floorboards with a sharp, rhythmic clack, a steady, inevitable countdown to their total destruction. The organist situated in the high balcony senses the catastrophic atmospheric shift. The musician falters in terror. The grand, sweeping wedding march abruptly sputters and dies, leaving a ringing, agonizing silence in the cavernous cathedral. The only sounds remaining are the click of my shoes and the frantic, shallow breathing of the trapped groom. At the grand marble altar, Connor looks like he might physically collapse. The temporary bravado he clung to after leveraging loan shark money to make bail evaporates completely. His jaw hangs slack. His eyes are wide, bloodshot, and darting wildly between Jasmine and the towering, terrifying figure of Donovan Pierce. Connor knows instantly that his desperate delusional extortion plan has failed before it even began. He is a rat caught in a steel trap, completely exposed in front of the city's most powerful elite. In the front row, Barbara sits utterly paralyzed. Her heavily manicured hands clutch the polished wood of the pew in front of her. Her mouth moves, but no sound escapes. The glamorous aristocratic facade she had so carefully painted on for the cameras shatters into a million jagged pieces. Thomas, however, does not freeze. My father realizes in a split second that his entire world is burning to the ground. The Pierce family is not here to be cornered. They are not here to negotiate bail money or protect their public image. They are here to publicly execute the fraudulent empire Thomas has spent a lifetime building. The realization snaps the last remaining thread of his sanity. Pure, unadulterated rage violently overrides his meticulously crafted social decorum. Thomas shoves his way out of the front pew, nearly knocking over a highly prominent state senator in the process. He storms onto the crimson carpet, his face mottled with furious dark purple patches. The veins in his neck bulge against his starched white collar. He completely ignores Donovan Pierce. He completely ignores the hundreds of powerful guests watching his meltdown. His rabid, bloodshot eyes are locked entirely on me. He charges down the aisle. His expensive leather shoes stomp heavily against the floor, closing the distance between us with terrifying, reckless speed. He is breathing heavily, completely consumed by the blind desire to destroy the daughter who refuses to stay in the gutter where he placed her. He raises his right hand high into the air, balling his fingers into a heavy, violent fist. He fully intends to strike me down, to beat me into submission right in front of the altar. "What the hell are you doing here, you piece of trash?" Thomas screams at the absolute top of his lungs. His voice tears through the dead silence of the church. It is a harsh, brutal roar, completely devoid of any parental affection or basic human decency. The sheer volume and raw hatred in his tone caused several guests in the adjacent rows to physically flinch and recoil in horror. The heavy scent of the imported white roses suddenly feels sickening, underscoring the absolute ugliness of his violent outburst. I do not blink. I do not retreat a single inch. As his heavy fist comes swinging down toward my face, fueled by decades of arrogant entitlement, I pivot smoothly on my heel. I slip cleanly out of his striking path with the practiced fluid motion of someone who has spent years navigating far more dangerous hazards. The momentum of his missed blow pulls his entire body awkwardly forward. He stumbles past me, his arms flailing wildly as he desperately tries to regain his balance on the crimson runner. I step calmly to the side, entirely unbothered by his pathetic public display of violence. I turn to face the altar, positioning myself perfectly in the center of the aisle. I raise my left hand high into the air. The brilliant light streaming through the massive windows catches the thick, jagged burn scars that crisscross my skin. They are the permanent, undeniable proof of the brutal reality he forced me to endure, the very scars I earned building the empire he tried to steal. I look directly at my stumbling, enraged father. I look at Connor sweating at the altar. I look at the sea of shocked elite faces watching my every move, and I snap my fingers. The sharp crack of my fingers echoed like a pistol shot through the sudden suffocating silence of the cathedral. It was the absolute last sound Thomas expected to hear after missing his violent, desperate swing. Before my father could recover his balance or launch a second attack, the massive dual projector screen suspended high above the grand marble altar abruptly flickered to life. These towering canvas displays, elegantly framed by thousands of imported white roses, had been meticulously positioned by Barbara's expensive wedding planners. They were intended to broadcast a sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated photo montage of Connor and Jasmine's whirlwind romance to the hundreds of elite guests. Instead, they became the unyielding instruments of my family's total annihilation. A blinding wash of stark white light flooded the apse, casting long, harsh shadows over Connor's sweating face. The colossal screens did not display smiling engagement photos from Martha's Vineyard. Instead, a high-resolution, brutally magnified document flashed simultaneously across both displays. It was a legally binding marriage certificate processed and stamped by a dingy late-night wedding chapel in Nevada. The text was razor-sharp, leaving absolutely zero room for misinterpretation, spin, or denial. The groom's name, printed in stark black ink, was Connor. The bride's name, resting right beside his, was Brittany. The official date stamp, boldly highlighted in glowing yellow ink, proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the golden boy standing at the altar in a bespoke tuxedo had already been legally married to his co-conspirator for 6 full months. A collective, deafening gasp ripped through the 500 guests packing the oak pews. It was the sound of a perfectly curated reality violently tearing at the seams. The high-profile politicians adjusted their spectacles in shock. The old money socialites dropped their silk fans, their mouths falling open in unvarnished horror. They were sitting in a $1 million wedding ceremony dressed in couture, staring at indisputable proof of blatant, premeditated bigamy. At the altar, Connor stumbled backward, his polished dress shoes slipping against the smooth marble floor. He stared up at his own signature on the 50-foot screens, the last remnants of color entirely draining from his face. He opened his mouth to formulate a lie, to shout a defense, but his vocal cords completely paralyzed under the weight of his exposure. Before the bewildered congregation could even process the sheer audacity of the fake wedding, the massive screens shifted. The marriage certificate vanished instantly, replaced by a cascading, rapid-fire sequence of offshore financial documents. They were the raw, unencrypted bank statements retrieved directly from the silver flash drive I had confiscated at the airport. Columns of numbers, routing details, and wire transfer logs scrolled across the canvas in devastating detail. The stolen $5 million from the Pierce Syndicate escrow accounts was tracked with surgical precision. The highlighted lines showed the exact, undeniable flow of the embezzled funds, bouncing through untraceable shell companies in the Cayman Islands, before landing squarely in domestic accounts, controlled exclusively by Thomas and Barbara. The corporate titans and ruthless CEOs sitting in the audience did not need a financial translator to understand what they were looking at. They recognized the glaring digital fingerprints of severe multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. The murmurs in the pews escalated into a dark, buzzing hum of outrage and realization. The flawless, untouchable reputation of the model family was crumbling in real time, brick by pristine brick. Then came the absolute nail in the coffin. The financial documents blinked out of existence, plunging the altar into a fraction of a second of darkness. When the screens illuminated again, it was not with static documents, but with crystal clear high-definition video. The church's state-of-the-art surround sound system, rented specifically to amplify a joyful wedding choir, crackled to life with a different kind of audio entirely. It was hidden camera footage captured straight from the formal dining room of my parents' sprawling Fairfield estate. The lighting on the screen was warm and golden, a scene of domestic luxury, but the words echoing through the cavernous cathedral were laced with absolute venom. Barbara's face filled the massive screens, magnified to terrifying proportions. Her cultured, melodious tone was entirely gone, replaced by the shrill, vicious screech of a cornered predator. She was pacing the length of her mahogany dining table, waving a crystal champagne flute and screaming directly at Thomas. "I do not care if Connor rots in a federal cell for the next 20 years." Barbara's voice boomed through the church speakers, echoing off the ancient stone pillars and raining down on the horrified wedding guests. "He made the mistake, Thomas. He left the digital trail. As long as that $5 million insurance payout hits our accounts and secures our lifestyle, he is a necessary sacrifice. Let the FBI have him. I will not lose my social standing over his pathetic incompetence." The cathedral erupted. The tense, buzzing silence was completely and violently shattered, replaced by the deafening roar of 500 elite guests reacting to the monstrous revelation. The meticulously crafted reputation of the model family, built on decades of philanthropy, charity galas, and polished smiles, disintegrated into toxic ash. They were not benevolent aristocrats. They were ruthless, conniving criminals who were actively willing to feed their favorite golden son to the federal prison system just to maintain their country club memberships. Thomas, still standing in the center aisle where he had missed his punch, looked like a man who had just been struck by a speeding train. His arms hung limply at his sides, his chest heaving as he stared up at the 50-foot projection of his wife committing treason against their own flesh and blood. But it was Connor's reaction that cemented the destruction. He stood at the altar, staring up at the screen, physically shaking. The delusion he had harbored, the desperate belief that his parents were acting in his best interest, that they would use the extorted Pierce money to save him from federal prison, shattered entirely. He looked down from the screen to where his mother sat in the front pew. Barbara was frozen, her hands covering her mouth in sheer, unadulterated panic as her true monstrous nature was broadcast to the world. Connor realized in that agonizing public moment that he was nothing to them but a disposable asset. The whispers in the pews escalated into absolute, uncontainable chaos. Guests were standing up, shouting over each other, pointing at the screens and backing away from the front rows, as if Thomas and Barbara were suddenly infected with a lethal plague. Socialites grabbed their designer coats, completely abandoning any pretense of decorum to rush for the heavy mahogany doors. Investors who had trusted Thomas with millions were already pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their legal teams to sever all ties before the federal indictments hit the news. The magnificent million-dollar wedding had officially transformed into a spectacular, inescapable execution, and there was absolutely nowhere left for the model family to hide. The absolute chaos in the pews did not consist entirely of fleeing socialites and terrified politicians. Deep in the shadows of the cathedral's rear alcoves, the dynamic was violently different. Half a dozen men did not run for the carved wooden exits. Instead, they stood up in perfect, terrifying unison. They were not wearing imported Italian silk, and they certainly did not carry invitations etched in gold leaf. They were the brutal, unforgiving loan sharks Barbara and Thomas had foolishly leveraged their non-existent futures against. These men had been promised a massive return on investment guaranteed by the impending Pierce family merger and the extortion of billionaire capital. Now staring at the 50-foot projection of Barbara committing federal insurance fraud and exposing the total bankruptcy of the family, the reality of the con washed over them. They realized instantly that the millions they had fronted were gone, vaporized by the sheer arrogance of a fraudulent aristocracy. The men stepped out of the heavy wooden pews and began a slow, menacing march down the side aisles, their cold, dead eyes locked on Thomas with lethal intent. Connor saw the hardened, violent men advancing from the back of the church. The last shreds of his manufactured bravado completely dissolved into pure terror. The golden boy of Fairfield dropped heavily to his knees right on the pristine white altar steps, his expensive tuxedo pants tearing against the unforgiving marble. He completely ignored his advancing creditors and the roaring, panicked crowd behind him. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, desperately reaching out toward Jasmine. Tears streamed down his pale, clammy face, mixing with the heavy sweat dripping from his forehead. "Jasmine, please!" Connor sobbed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical wail that echoed off the stone-vaulted ceilings. "You have to tell your father to stop this. You have to call them off. I had nothing to do with this. I swear to God. My parents forced me. They planned the whole thing. They made me sign those papers and set up the escrow traps. I never wanted to steal from you. You have to believe me. Please show some mercy." Jasmine did not flinch. She stared down at the groveling, pathetic man at her feet with eyes entirely devoid of warmth. She took a deliberate, measured step backward, her dark trousers shifting gracefully as she removed herself from his desperate reach. She offered him nothing but cold, absolute, condemning silence. Thomas and Barbara heard their son's desperate betrayal over the deafening noise of the fleeing crowd. The last remaining illusion of their loving family dynamic instantly vaporized. The survival instinct of the cornered aristocrats kicked into overdrive, and they turned on their own flesh and blood with vicious, staggering speed. "You ungrateful, lying parasite!" Thomas shrieked, his face contorted in a mask of violent, unhinged rage. He pointed a shaking, accusing finger at his weeping son on the altar steps. "You orchestrated every single piece of this disaster. You forged those signatures. You set up the offshore accounts behind our backs. You ruined this family to cover your own pathetic gambling debts." Barbara joined the vicious onslaught, her shrill voice slicing through the heavy, floral-scented air. "He acted entirely alone," she screamed frantically, looking toward Donovan Pierce, desperately trying to sell the ultimate pathetic lie. "Thomas and I knew absolutely nothing about his criminal activities. We are victims of his deceit. He is a monster who manipulated his own parents. We disown him. We wash our hands of him completely." They were eating themselves alive, tearing each other apart at the altar of their ruined lives in a desperate, futile bid for self-preservation. But their mutual destruction was brutally cut short. The heavy, reinforced oak side doors of the cathedral violently burst open, splintering against the stone walls with a deafening crack. A tidal wave of navy blue windbreakers flooded the sanctuary. Dozens of federal agents stormed the aisles, their tactical boots hammering against the ancient marble floors. The operation was executed with flawless, terrifying precision. They moved right past the advancing loan sharks, entirely focused on their primary targets, cutting off every possible avenue of escape. Thomas Pierce, Barbara, Pierce Connor. Pierce, the lead agent, barked, his voice amplified by a heavy bullhorn that completely drowned out the chaotic screams of the wedding guests. "You are under arrest. We have official federal warrants for multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and aggravated identity theft." The agents descended on the altar like a coordinated strike force. Two heavily armed officers grabbed Thomas by his bespoke lapels, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the carved wooden pulpit. The sharp metallic ratcheting of heavy-duty handcuffs echoed loudly over the dying groans of the pipe organ. Connor did not resist. He simply collapsed completely onto the floor, curling into a weeping, pathetic ball, as an agent hauled his arms behind his back and locked his wrists in cold steel. Barbara tried to run. She spun around, her high heels catching on the heavy hem of her lavish couture gown. She stumbled, gasping for air, but a federal agent was already there. He grabbed her wrists with uncompromising force, twisting her arms behind her back. The stainless steel bracelets clicked securely into place, trapping her hands together. The sheer terrifying reality of the cold metal against her skin broke her entirely. The aristocratic pride she had wielded like a weapon, her entire life evaporated into thin air. Barbara dropped heavily to her knees on the crimson carpet. She scrambled forward, dragging her cuffed hands behind her, her expensive gown twisting and tearing around her legs. She crawled directly toward me, her eyes wild, desperate, and completely unhinged. She threw her upper body forward, frantically clawing at my tailored pant leg with her shoulder. "Please, Riley, please," Barbara wailed, burying her tear-stained face against my shin, sobbing uncontrollably. "You have to save us. Your reclamation company is worth millions. You can pay the bail. You can hire the best defense lawyers in the country. You have the money. We are family. You cannot let them take us away in chains. I am begging you." I looked down at the weeping, shattered woman groveling at my feet. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel a single shred of familial loyalty. I felt only the quiet, absolute satisfaction of a perfectly executed demolition. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal blazer. My fingers bypassed the encrypted flash drives and secure communication devices, closing around two specific items I had brought for this exact final moment. I pulled my hand free and tossed the objects directly onto the crimson runner. A cheap, coarse microfiber rag and a travel-sized plastic bottle of industrial bleach bounced off the carpet, coming to rest mere inches from Barbara's trembling face. She stared at the cheap cleaning supplies, her sobs hitching in her throat, as total, devastating comprehension washed over her. "You said I clean floors for a living," I stated, my voice ringing with cold, lethal authority over the sounds of the federal raid. "Start with the mess you just made. I hear federal prison needs good janitors." The federal agents haul Barbara to her feet, her hysterical sobs echoing off the vaulted ceilings as they drag her down the center aisle. She kicks and thrashes, but her protests are completely drowned out by the harsh metallic clanking of handcuffs and the stern commands of the arresting officers. Thomas and Connor follow in a synchronized march of utter disgrace, flanked by heavily armed tactical units. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral slam shut behind them, sealing their fate and silencing their reign of terror forever. 6 months later, the opulent fantasy world my family ruthlessly fabricated has been entirely replaced by cold, unforgiving reality. Thomas, Barbara, and Connor are no longer the untouchable aristocrats of Fairfield. They are federal inmates stripped of their bespoke suits, couture gowns, and boundless arrogance. Following a swift, merciless trial fueled by the insurmountable mountain of evidence, I handed the authorities all three were convicted on dozens of felony charges. Thomas sits in a maximum security penitentiary, his once commanding voice reduced to a raspy, ignored whisper among hardened criminals who do not care about his former golf handicaps or country club memberships. Connor, the golden boy, who believed he was destined to inherit an empire, shares a tiny concrete cell with a convicted smuggler, spending his days regretting the forged documents that sealed his doom. And Barbara, the woman who valued social standing above her own daughter's life, has finally found her true calling. Stripped of her imported cosmetics and silk dresses, she wears a stiff, oversized orange jumpsuit. Her daily routine consists exactly of what I prescribed at the altar. She pushes a heavy mop bucket down the bleak, fluorescent-lit corridors of a federal correctional facility, scrubbing scuff marks off the linoleum. There are no cameras, no socialites, and absolutely no mercy. With the architects of my misery locked away, the financial house of cards they built immediately collapsed. The sprawling, majestic suburban estate in Fairfield, the fortress where I was systematically belittled, starved, and treated as an invisible servant, was completely foreclosed. The banks swooped in with ruthless efficiency, seizing the property, the luxury vehicles, and every remaining asset to satisfy the massive debts and federal fines. The meticulously manicured lawns grew wild. The grand iron gates rusted. The model home became a vacant, abandoned monument to corporate greed. When the bank finally placed the foreclosed estate up for public auction to recoup a fraction of their losses, I was waiting. I did not attend the auction in person. I dispatched my lead corporate attorney with a blank check and a single directive to acquire the deed. Given the highly publicized, toxic scandal attached to the property, no respectable investor wanted to touch it. The bidding was virtually non-existent. Within 10 minutes, my multi-million-dollar reclamation firm purchased the sprawling 5-acre estate for absolute pennies on the dollar. I now legally owned the very ground where my parents had tried to bury me. But I have absolutely no intention of living in a haunted house. I stand on the sidewalk just beyond the property line, the collar of my dark wool trench coat turned up against the crisp morning chill. The sky above is a brilliant cloudless blue. The massive wrought iron gates have already been ripped from their hinges and hauled away as scrap metal. A fleet of heavy yellow construction vehicles idles on the dying grass, their diesel engines rumbling with a deep, rhythmic vibration that I can feel in the soles of my boots. I raise my hand and give a sharp, decisive nod to the demolition foreman standing near the perimeter. The massive engine of the primary crane roars to life, billowing a thick cloud of dark exhaust into the crisp air. Slowly, the heavy machinery pivots on its treads. A colossal solid steel wrecking ball suspended by thick woven iron cables swings backward in a long, deliberate arc. For a fraction of a second, the iron sphere hangs suspended in the air, a pendulum of absolute unyielding justice. Then the operator releases the brake. The wrecking ball hurtles forward with terrifying, unstoppable momentum. It slams directly into the center of the grand two-story living room window. The impact is deafening. A thunderous, explosive crack violently shatters the morning silence. Hundreds of shards of expensive, custom-paneled glass explode outward, glittering like crushed diamonds as they rain down onto the overgrown hydrangeas. The heavy steel sphere does not stop at the window. It obliterates the wooden framing, smashing directly into the mahogany-paneled walls of the formal dining room where Barbara used to hold her vicious interrogations. The structural beams scream and splinter. Entire sections of the roof groan and collapse inward, sending a massive billowing cloud of gray dust and drywall roaring into the sky. I do not blink. I stand perfectly still, watching the destruction with a profound, untethered sense of liberation. Again and again the wrecking ball swings. It crushes the grand staircase where I was once forbidden to walk. It pulverizes the pristine kitchen where I was denied meals. It obliterates the elegant study where Thomas plotted his financial treachery. With every devastating strike, decades of psychological torment, gaslighting, and financial abuse are violently erased from the earth. The toxic architecture of my childhood is systematically dismantled, torn apart by heavy machinery, until the towering, arrogant mansion is completely unrecognizable. By mid-afternoon, the Fairfield estate is entirely gone. The once imposing fortress has been reduced to a jagged, flattened landscape of shattered brick-twisted metal and pulverized wood. The dust slowly settles over the sprawling lot, leaving a vast, empty expanse of raw earth. The physical manifestation of my family's cruelty has been completely wiped from the map. I step past the yellow caution tape and walk directly onto the freshly churned dirt. The ground is soft and unsettled beneath my boots. I reach into my pocket and pull out a rolled, heavily annotated blueprint. I unfurl the thick parchment, letting the afternoon sun illuminate the crisp architectural lines and modern sweeping designs. I am not going to leave this space empty. I am going to salt the earth of their legacy by planting something beautiful over its corpse. Where the dining room once stood, there will be a state-of-the-art trauma recovery wing, staffed by elite psychologists, dedicated to helping survivors of domestic and financial abuse. Where the grand foyer cast its oppressive shadows, a modern glass-walled career training center will rise. It will be equipped with advanced technological labs, financial literacy classrooms, and job placement offices. It will be a sanctuary designed exclusively to empower young adults who are fighting to escape the very same psychological traps I survived. I look down at the blueprints tracing the bold printed title at the top of the page. It will be a fully funded multi-million-dollar campus dedicated to ensuring that no vulnerable person is ever made to feel disposable, invisible, or powerless again. I fold the blueprints, tuck them back into my coat, and look out over the cleared horizon, ready to break ground. The suffocating dust of the Fairfield estate demolition has long since settled, replaced by the towering, unyielding steel skeleton of the new trauma recovery campus. But my focus tonight is miles away from the roar of construction machinery, elevated high above the bustling electric streets of the financial district. I am seated at a polished mahogany table inside the highly exclusive, heavily soundproofed private dining room of Le Bernardin. The ambient lighting is warm and meticulously calibrated, casting a soft golden glow over the pristine crystal glassware, sterling silver cutlery, and untouched plates of delicate seared wagyu. Across the heavy table sits Jasmine. She has completely and permanently shed the fragile, naive heiress persona her father's desperate enemies once tried to exploit. Tonight she wears a striking, severe emerald green silk blouse, her posture radiating absolute, uncompromising confidence. She is no longer just a billionaire's heavily guarded daughter. She is Apex Reclamation's lead legal counsel, a brilliant, ruthless corporate attorney, and most importantly, one of my closest, most trusted friends. Sitting at the head of the table, commanding the intimate space with terrifying gravitational force, is Donovan Pierce. The syndicate boss turned legitimate corporate emperor still possesses an aura of lethal authority, but the icy, predatory hostility that defined our first explosive encounter is entirely absent. Tonight he looks at me not as a threat to be neutralized or a pawn to be leveraged, but as an absolute equal. A peer who survived the crossfire, outmaneuvered his rivals, and built a staggering empire directly from the ashes of betrayal. Resting precisely in the center of the table, flanked by the remnants of our Michelin-starred meal, is a thick, custom leather-bound portfolio. It contains the finalized, ironclad legal framework for an unprecedented corporate alliance. Jasmine slides the heavy document across the polished mahogany toward me, a triumphant, razor-sharp smile playing on her lips. It is a $100 million 10-year exclusive contract. Pierce Corp is officially outsourcing the entirety of its international disaster recovery, hazardous material cleanup, and hostile environment logistics exclusively to Apex Reclamation. It is not just a business deal. It is the kind of staggering, monopoly-cementing alliance that will propel my company from a dominant national player into an untouchable global titan. We will be handling the massive, catastrophic messes no other corporation on Earth has the stomach or the spine to touch. I uncap my solid gold fountain pen, the cool metal heavy and grounding in my grip. I smoothly sign my name on the final dotted line, the ink flowing dark and permanent, cementing our alliance. Donovan reaches forward, his massive ringed hand grasping a chilled bottle of rare vintage Dom Perignon. He pours the sparkling golden liquid into our 3 crystal flutes with practiced, deliberate elegance. He raises his glass high, the faceted crystal catching the dim, sophisticated light of the dining room. "To Apex!" Donovan rumbles, his deep, commanding voice resonating with genuine, hard-earned respect. "And to the woman who cleans up the catastrophic messes the rest of the world is too terrified to face." I raise my own glass, clinking it against theirs with a sharp, resonant chime. As I lower my hand to the table, my gaze drops instinctively to the thick, jagged crescent burn scar wrapping around the base of my left thumb. For decades, Thomas and Barbara had weaponized this physical flaw. They used it as undeniable, constant proof of my inherent ugliness, clumsiness, and lack of aristocratic grace. They relentlessly demanded I hide it under long-sleeved silk gloves and heavy concealer, treating my skin as a shameful, humiliating brand that ruined their perfect family aesthetic. Now bathed in the warm, sophisticated light of the private dining room, I see the scar for what it truly is. It is not a defect, it is not a blemish. It is the ultimate, undeniable badge of my survival. It is the permanent physical proof of the brutal, suffocating fire I was forced to walk through, and the raw, unyielding steel I forged within myself to escape it. I do not pull my sleeve down. I do not hide my hand. I let my scarred flesh rest proudly on the polished wood, a silent testament to everything I have overcome and everything I have built. Hours later, the celebratory dinner concludes and I return to the nerve center of my operations. The Apex Reclamation headquarters is a towering 70-story glass and steel high-rise dominating the downtown skyline. I bypass the security checkpoints with a nod to the night guards and take the private executive elevator straight to the top floor. The steel doors slide silently open and I step out into the crisp, biting night air of the open-air rooftop terrace. The freezing wind whips fiercely at the heavy hem of my dark wool trench coat as I walk purposefully to the reinforced glass parapet. I rest my scarred hands on the freezing metal railing and look out over the sprawling, illuminated grid of the city. Millions of lights glitter in the darkness, forming a vast, pulsing network of wealth, power, and relentless industry. From this staggering 70-story height, the luxury vehicles navigating the streets below look like microscopic insects, and the towering corporate monoliths surrounding me are reduced to mere stepping stones. The sheer scale of my victory settles heavily into my chest. I built this. I clawed my way out of the suffocating toxic gutter my parents meticulously designed for me. I leveraged their darkest, most desperate secrets against them, dismantled their fraudulent legacy piece by piece, and constructed an untouchable fortress of power and absolute independence in its place. I am entirely alone on the rooftop, enveloped by the vast, quiet supremacy of the skyline, but I have never felt less isolated. I breathe in the freezing electric air, feeling the immense grounding gravity of my reality. My family had tried their hardest to define me. They had tried to write a permanent narrative where I was the pathetic, disposable outcast, meant only to serve as the invisible, bruised foundation for their glittering, fraudulent empire. I looked down at the sparkling city streets, my sharp reflection staring back at me in the reinforced glass barrier. A slow, genuine smile touches my lips. They introduced me as the family disgrace. I murmur to the empty, sprawling night, my voice low, steady, and vibrating with absolute, unbreakable certainty. Now, they aren't even worth the trash I get paid to clean. The vibrant, glittering city lights slowly blur, dissolving into the quiet, triumphant darkness as the scene fades to black. The story of Riley's ultimate triumph over her family's ruthless betrayal teaches us a profound lesson. Our true worth is never defined by the toxic labels others force upon us. For years, she was dismissed as the family disgrace, her physical and emotional scars treated as ugly symbols of failure. Yet Riley used those exact experiences as the unyielding foundation to build an untouchable empire and protect others. It proves that the deep pain we endure can be repurposed into our greatest strength. Take control of your own narrative today. Claim your absolute independence and comment below with your story.